Okay. I've clicked the buttons. I've dialed the knobs. I've set the content to stun. I don't know why I said that, but it is what it is. I've been trying to change up my opening lines here. A little variety for you, gang. But we're going to have another episode today of Wick TV, and we're going to be talking about girl bosses and snail girls, maybe cat girls. There's all sorts of girls I didn't know existed, but I'm learning today. We were just backstage, right? And I was getting lectured about what a snail girl is, and I thought to myself, you know what? My audience might want to know what a snail girl is too. Gang, so first of all, conservative realism, hello. Nice to see you. Tessie Johnson, nice to see you as well. Mark Strike, good to see you too. Welcome. Tunachip should be here soon. And once he gets here, we'll start in earnest. But Fairy Queen, while we wait, tell us about snail girls. What's a snail girl? What's a soft girl? What are all these types of girls? Tell us a little bit.
So the thesis that I am bringing forward tonight is basically my critique of the girl boss, and to sort of ground it, I think that we all understand what a girl boss is. A girl boss, like for those of you who don't know, there was a book. It was written by Sophia Amoruso in like roughly the 2010s era. She was the CEO of a clothing line company called Nasty Gal, and she wrote a book that was called Girlboss. And at that time, the girl boss, like it was used as a positive term. It was a term that associated, female empowerment with femininity, which was new. Because historically, like when you look at examples of how the working woman was portrayed in media and the way that she was talked about, she was usually talked about as being extremely masculine, as doing a man's job, as wearing, this is the woman of the 80s who's wearing the boxy, shoulder pads, the gray suit, the white shirt underneath, that's typically like how we used to think of the working woman. The working woman, is an old crone, right, who is angry and is masculine and manly. But girl boss in the 2010s associated, youthfulness, youthful femininity, because with empowerment, with female empowerment, like the way that these female CEOs presented themselves, the way that these women were presented in media, they were presented as young, as new, as hip and trendy, as the female equivalent to Mark Zuckerberg, to Elon Musk, to up and coming, people who were in their startups. And at first, the term girl boss was generally used, I think, like in a positive fashion. Over time, what we have seen is that it's become used as a negative term. Today, like amongst Generation Z and really amongst like millennials who are on the younger end, and I don't know if I count as an old, Generation Z person or as like a millennial or a very young millennial person. I genuinely don't know. I was born in 96. But the point is that this group of people like uses the term girl boss in a pejorative way. To be a girl boss today in 2024, to be called that by someone is usually a negative thing. It's usually, I think.
Oh no, finish your thought, but I have some questions for you. But yeah, finish your thought and I'll poke a little.
Yeah. And one of the reasons why I say that is because of the rise of, well, there are two different trends. I'm sure Tunachip probably can think of trends that he's noticed as well. The trends that I've noticed from Generation Z specifically as a response to the millennial girl boss woman in the neon pink suit who's the VP of corporate is the phenomenon of the snail girl and the phenomenon of the soft life, which we can get into, but I'll put a pin in that.
And the snail girl. We will get into it because a snail girl, that doesn't sound. Look, for me, when I think of a girl boss, I think of a woman who is out there making moves, being in charge. This could be good or bad, depending, obviously, right? But I think that I don't know if it's a pejorative as much as you would. As much as you're implying, what about it is a pejorative? Like, why, if Tuna jumps in today, right now, and calls you a girl boss, why would that offend you?
I don't know that it would offend me necessarily. It's more that like it's the intent behind the word, and because I would say that because generally speaking, like when somebody says, "Oh, you're such a girl boss," because that comes with this baggage attached to the word, I would probably initially interpret it as a pejorative. But like, let's say let's say if you called me a girl boss, or let's say if somebody else like who is not of this time period, like it called me a girl boss who just wasn't aware of this stuff.
So
no
you
offense,
just called me
right?
old and out of touch. If an old and out of touch guy called me a girl boss,
yeah,
you would
honestly,
think it's different. Okay.
Yeah, I would think it's different. But I think that people who are more familiar with like these trends that I'm talking about, like the soft girl trend, the snail girl trend, I think for those people, the intent behind it is usually negative. So, and like, here's an example of this. So, like, here's one that's easily accessible to everyone. Sneeko, right? One of the common like retorts and like insults that he hurls.
A girl boss?
He's not a girl boss. But the point is, like, when he wants to insult other women, right, for trying to be feminist, he says, "Oh, you're such a girl boss." This happens on a lot of podcasts. This happens on the Fresh and Fit podcast. It happens on the Whatever podcast. A very common response and way to denigrate the women on those shows is to sort of mock the idea, right, that they're being such a girl boss, by oftentimes because the participants are usually OnlyFans workers, which is another aspect of the working woman, which we will get into later. And so it's usually used as a pejorative. It's usually used as an insult. And it depends on who you are, right? But I think so would I consider it an insult? No, I'd probably laugh at it. It's a joke, right? Like it's supposed to be in the context of this conversation. But somebody somebody my and Tuna Chip's age or younger who like uses that term, I would usually interpret that off the bat as it's probably an insult.
Okay, so a few thoughts on this, right? While we're waiting for Tuna Chip, and hopefully Tuna Chip will be here soon, gang. I DM'd him, I messaged him, I told him to jump backstage. Um, Otherwise, it's going to be a very one-sided conversation because I'm not familiar with almost any of these terms. But from how you're describing these things, one of the worries that comes to mind immediately is that the younger generation, you, has ceded ground in this, and what has become a strength, or what was a strength, what was something that was a positive, has been, because through mockery, basically turned into a negative. And I don't know if that's a good development. And I would push back a little and say that it's one of those things that if this is the case, and if you're accurately portraying this, then we need to turn this ship around, right? We need to reclaim this idea of being an empowered person, right? Not just with women, okay? I know we're going to be talking about women a lot today, but I think that we need to kind of stop this kind of gender war nonsense that we do, where men can be assertive, domineering, bossy, etc. But when a woman is assertive, domineering, bossy, it's a negative thing. Like, look, no one likes someone who's super bossy, whether they're man or woman, okay? But for whatever reason, men get away with it more. And I think that there's something worth interrogating about why, and discussing what are some ways to kind of reclaim this word and things like that. I don't know where Tuna is, gang. Hopefully he gets here soon. But yeah, that's where we are.
Yeah.
What are some of your thoughts there? Go ahead.
Yeah, and just to sort of like give you some evidence to prove that this is not just me and my own personal interpretation, I would point you towards the representation of the girl boss archetype in film and media, and like what it usually means when you see somebody who is a girl boss. So an immediate example you could come to mind would be The Boys, okay? That's really big right now because everybody's watching that series, okay? The classic example of the negative portrayal of the girl boss, it's everywhere, right? It's the CEO of the company. It's Stormfront. I can't remember what her name was. It was the woman who portrayed the equivalent of Wonder Woman. We have one of the taglines that was mocked in that show is "Girls Get It Done," right? And you have Starlight, you have Stormfront, you have all of the female superheroes who are using that's an example. Another example would be I Care a Lot. That was a movie that came up pretty recently. It was about a woman who epitomized the vision of the girl boss by exploiting old people and extracting all of their money. The whole point of that show is that she uses all of this feminist rhetoric, and yet she uses it basically to extract wealth and resources from really vulnerable old people. And there's so many films and like examples I can give you.
But of both of those, and I wonder if this will translate to these other examples that you're going to give. It's not so much a concept of girl boss that is being challenged, but it's the concept around. It's a larger. It's like we got to pull the camera back. And for The Boys, for example, it parodies, for lack of a better term, woke culture, right? And how corporate wokeism, right?
Mm-hmm.
Corporate adoption of these social justice terms can be turned on its head and made into a joke of what they're meant to be. And I think that that's kind of the point, right? It's not to say that these things aren't a positive, right? But it's to say that we can do a parody of positive things, and it becomes this very negative thing in the end. But that's not just with the girl bosses. That's like as you mentioned in the Boys, right? They parody like social justice when it comes to race and racial issues as well. With who's the guy, A-Train or whatever, and his whole arc. They do that constantly. So I don't know if I would consider both of those like a critique of girl bossism in so much as they're just parroting.
I would both agree and disagree. So I would agree with you that the point of The Boys is basically to critique woke capitalism. It's to critique these corporations and companies that use the brand of anti-racism or use the brand, of like of feminism in order to enrich themselves. It's the Homelander is a hollow symbol of the United States. He's blonde, he's blue-eyed, he played baseball, he has the American flag on his shoulders, but really he's a rapist and he kills people and he's terrible. Like obviously, like that's true with the boys, but it's also, I think it is very specifically gendered with the Girlboss too. And I can give you other examples of film and media that do this, but before I do, to prove to you that I think it's specifically gendered, I would point you to a couple of stats. So these that went along and that were roughly in the same time period as this swath of girl boss villains entered into media. So an example of this would be the Wall Street Journal in 2016. This is a quote. It said nearly 80% of digital and print media stories about companies in crisis cited the CEO as to blame when this company's leader was a woman, compared to 31% of stories assigning blame to male CEOs in stories about companies in similar situations. And another point to make, which is true, which is that this rise of like the girl boss villain, the girl boss being a villain, came alongside a swath of anti-Me Too, like backlash to the Me Too movement. It happened, like these representations happened like in roughly the same time period as the Amber Heard versus Johnny Depp case. And I would say to you, like, this is like the mantra of the critique of the girl boss is, oh, because she's a woman, I can't critique her. Like, I can't critique a woman when she does something evil. Margaret Thatcher is like a person that's frequently brought up. And this doesn't just apply to women who are in media. What I'm saying is, I think that these media representations are, first of all, I think that they're affecting the way that women are represented in actual media and actual girl boss CEOs, and they really zeroed in focus upon them. But it also changes the way that we view history. It changes the way our interpretation of icons of the past. So, like, here are some examples of female CEOs, like in roughly the 2010s, who were obliterated by the media, who were ripped to shreds for often legitimately heinous behavior, to be frank. So Elizabeth Holmes, she's the most commonly known person. This was the person who faked, being able to test, from a single drop of blood, a litany of diseases, and fooled, so many corporations and companies and men in power that her design was able to do this, when in fact it was bunk the whole time. And in fact, she took advantage of so many people in order to push this message. But she's not the only person. There's so many other. Audrey Gilman, the CEO of the athletic apparel company Outdoor Voices.
Can you give me an example of one that was doing heinous shit that got obliterated? That wasn't doing heinous shit.
It's not that any of these people that I could name you aren't responsible or couldn't be critiqued for what they did. They can be critiqued. But the issue is that when companies that are led by male leaders are critiqued, the blame is laid at the foot of the entire company as a whole. So when Wells Fargo had its scandal, when Volkswagen and BMW had a scandal, the company is to blame, right? The way that it's portrayed in digital media in the news is that these companies are associated, they are scandalous, not that the person who is in lead of them is scandalous. And even though the idea, and it's also true that the appeal to double standards, as it applies to female CEOs and women in power, you wouldn't say that to me if I was a man. That's now used as a sort of, it's a sarcastic thing. It rings hollow in the ears of most listeners and viewers, because when they hear that, they think, oh, well, you're just saying that to justify, you firing, half your staff because
or committing huge amounts of fraud. Yes. No.
Yes. Yeah. And so, but the issue is that even though it does ring hollow and it is used as an excuse, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that it's wrong. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's not true. And when it's affecting, when these representations and when the way that we talk about women in power is so affecting, clearly affecting the way that people view the idea of there being a female boss in general in the real world, that's an indication that there is a problem.
So I would go finish your thought, but then I have some more questions. I don't know where Tunachip is. It might just be us tonight, and that's all that matters, gang. It might just be me and Fairyqueen versus the world. But yeah, give us what you got. Finish your thought, please.
Yeah. And so I would say that, and I don't think this just applies, but the problem is I don't think that this only applies to more recent female CEOs. I don't think this is just Amber Heard and Elizabeth Holmes or Mickey. I don't think that this is, or Stephanie Corey. I don't think it's just these women for whom it's the focus. I also think that the anti-girl boss rhetoric is being applied to women and icons of female empowerment that came from the past. So an example of this would be, and like we have so many examples of women who and their achievements and what they've done that is now being sneered at, frankly, by younger women and
Sure.
by like
What's
women
an
of like
example?
J.K. Rowling. So J.K. Rowling is now known as a TERF. J.K. Rowling is not popular anywhere, okay? She is somebody like about 15 years ago, okay? If you were to bring up J.K. Rowling, okay, like actually 15 years, probably, yeah, I would say 15 years ago, probably 15 years ago, if you were to bring her up as an example, people viewed her as a sign of female empowerment. That's not true
Sure.
anymore.
Well, what happened between now and then, I wonder, that changed people's perception of her? I don't know if it's about girl bosses. I don't know if that's it.
I know exactly what you're referring to. And yes, it is because of like what she wrote specifically about trans issues, but it's also because her power, her opinion about trans issues is connected in the minds of many people and in the way that she's represented because she is a rich white woman. She is a fixture of capitalism. She is a fixture of whiteness. She is a fixture of power. And of course, she would be critical of trans issues. Of course, she would have these positions because that's what it is, right? Because she doesn't care about the underclass, but people who are really suffering. Like in the wake of like criticizing J.K. Rowling for her views on trans issues, there was a reawakening of critique of J.K. Rowling's books themselves as having racist stereotypes. So there was a conversation, for instance, are the goblins representative of Jews, right? Are the Harry Potter books anti-Semitic?
But that also happens with, and I'll give you another example that's just made the rounds of a man who's had that same thing happen. Gary Gygax, founder of Dungeons and Dragons, right? There's been a lot of re-examining of his works through racial lenses and things like that based on statements he made in the past. This happened with a whole host of literary figures, both men and women. It's just that's just the time we live in where we are re-examining. And I think it's a bad thing, to be clear. I think it's weird that we connect people's politics or people's views on life and culture to their art. I think that's very weird. Like if you liked Harry Potter before and you enjoyed the story, why? Because the author suddenly has views you don't like. Why do you not like it anymore? It's like everything. It's this weird thing where if someone has bad views, then everything they do and everything they produce has to be also bad. And I don't get it, but I observed this happening over and over and over again, where like J.K. Rowling's a perfect example of this. She had a beloved children's series that was adored the world over. And then she took a controversial stance, and now half her audience hates her because she took the stance that they find to be quote unquote evil. And
I would ask you this, okay? And I would ask you this about, and I genuinely don't know, so I don't know. So I am a participant in Dungeons and Dragons, but I'm not a keeper of the lore, okay? I don't know much about Gary Gygax. I don't know much about the foundations of Dungeons and Dragons. So I'll just ask you, okay? Do you think that the criticisms of Gary Gygax, do you think that he has been ripped to pieces and excoriated like to the same degree? Gygax, excuse me. Do you think he's been ripped to pieces to nearly the same level and degree as J.K. Rowling?
No, because he died back before social media. But had he been alive today, I think it would be a much different story.
I don't know. And so, I'm not sure. I don't know if I would give that assumption. I don't think that's true. And the reason why I don't think that's true is that because I think we can find examples of male authors who have literally committed sexual assault, sexual violence, who are still celebrated, who are still given press that is still vastly better than J.K. Rowling. So Neil Gaiman is somebody like he recently was exposed as like
but that's like super recent. That was like what, a month ago.
He's not the only one. Junot Diaz, he's another person who was exposed.
I don't even know who that is.
So I'm sorry, this is lit brain nerd. So for those of you who don't know, Junot Diaz is he is a he's a very famous author. He wrote a book called The Wonderful Life of Oscar Wilde. He's won multiple awards. He's a very well-respected literary writer. I don't remember if he's Puerto Rican or if he's Cuban. I know that he's Hispanic, and I know that I think that and he talks very specifically about his heritage within
Okay,
his
go on,
books.
please. Yeah.
But I know that he very specifically talks about his heritage within the books and his struggles of coming overseas and living in the United States. That's what The Wonderful Life of Oscar Wilde is. It's what it's about. And at the end of the book, unfortunately, the boy is killed and he's murdered in search of his love for his girlfriend. But a few years ago, he was exposed for I'm not sure if I think it was sexual harassment. I don't think it was sexual assault. Juan Diaz has not been critiqued to nearly the same degree as J.K. Rowling. And J.K. Rowling has never harassed.
Everyone knows who
J.K.
Rowling is. No one knows who Juan Diaz is. There's a vast difference in popularity. You don't think so. So if I went and I asked my chat right now, I asked, hey, who's this guy versus, hey, who's J.K. Rowling? I guarantee you, everyone in my chat will know who J.K. Rowling is, and I guarantee you, a lot of them just won't know who Juan Diaz is.
Let me counter that. Do you think that most of the chat would? You mentioned Gary Gygax? Chat. Do most of you know who that is? I didn't know who that was. This is the first time I've ever heard his name, and I've played Dungeons and Dragons before.
Yeah, Gary Gygax is dead though. He's been dead for years.
Well, so is Roald Dahl, though, and people still remember his name, though. And it's this, people still, read Matilda. And so, J.K. Rowling is an example. She's not the only example. There are other examples of very famous women in power who have been given a slapback and critique in, the hindsight of history. Ellen DeGeneres, she used to be very popular. Now she's mean, okay? People don't like Ellen DeGeneres anymore.
I don't disagree.
Kamala Harris, she's now regarded as phony as Hillary Clinton. And Hillary Clinton wasn't liked either. Martha Stewart, Julia Child, all of these people, all of these people very consistently have a common theme amongst them, which is that these are women who rose to heights of exceptional power, within, and for a very long time, if you dialed the clock back 15 or even 20 years ago, these women would have been very well respected. They would have been seen as icons of feminist power. They would have been seen as examples of female empowerment. These are the women who are written down in the history books, whom little girls are taught to emulate and taught to feel proud of. Today, those little girls look at those women and their accomplishments and their achievements and sneer at them as phony, as inauthentic, and as a icon to reject. And they are rejecting it in favor of the Snail girl and the soft girl life.
Okay. Two things, because I want to get to Snail girls. I'm really curious what a Snail girl is. But first, I have to push back on this, right? You're right that nowadays that some of these women, some of the names you named, are considered, who were pedestaled, got exposed as not being worth the pedestal. Hillary Clinton, though, has always been hated. My entire life, everyone has hated Hillary Clinton. In the 90s, maybe just because I grew up as a military family and I grew up amongst a bunch of right-wingers, but people have hated the Clintons forever. I don't know if I would ever consider her having a huge popular front that wasn't divisive, right? And when we talk about J.K. Rowling as an example, when we talk about Amber Heard is another example. These are all people who have had scandals, and you could say they've been overblown, etc. But let's look at men's scandals. Kevin Spacey, let's look at that one. No one works with him, right? No one is trying to no one takes him seriously anymore. He has been de-pedestaled just as much as a woman has. And again, I think that it's weird, though, that when it happens to a woman, it's, oh no, but when it happens to a man, that's just, they deserve it, right?
See, I would disagree with you. So for a couple of reasons. The first one is, okay, and Amber Heard especially, right? I'm not denying that she was a monster. And in my opinion, and a lot of people don't agree with me, I watched as much of the trial as I could. I watched days of watching hours and hours of testimony. And I understand why the jury voted in Johnny Depp's favor. And I agree with their decision based off of what I saw. I think it's probably true that she abused him within that relationship. That's my opinion. If somebody wants to fight with me on that later, I'd be welcome to hear it. But from what I've seen, from the evidence I think that's fair. However, right, have you seen the documentary about Kevin Spacey? Like, what do you know about
No,
Kevin
I
Spacey's like
haven't
assaults?
seen the documentary, right? But what I know
I
is he was accused credibly of sexual misconduct with young men. I don't again pretend to be an expert on this, and I didn't study up to argue about Kevin Spacey, but he's persona non grata in a lot of spaces. So is Louis C.K. So is fucking P
well,
Diddy. So is a lot of these men who you just again are gone that were cultural significant. I would never call P Diddy an icon. Fuck that guy, right? But like, there's a lot of people who had positions of
so
prominence that no longer do, and that were men that are no longer seen as role models, so no longer seen as someone to look up to. Look at Obama. Let's use Obama as an example, right? When I was voting for him, right, when he was in office, he was seen as this kind of like almost like this cultish kind of messianic, like this is what a man is, right? This is the modern man. And now, even amongst Democrats and a lot of leftists, he's seen as a traitor and scum, and he's been tarnished. I don't know if this is a gender thing. I think this is just something that happens
nah,
when you
I would
get.
disagree.
Okay,
So
go on.
I would disagree for a couple of reasons. So first of all, let's talk specifically about Kevin Spacey and Louis C.K. Is a different situation. I think Louis C.K. has his career back. I'm pretty sure that like he had a comeback like stand-up comedy routine. I think
Like,
it's
I
true that
don't.
his name has become associated with sexually harassing women, like bringing them into like, the changing rooms
Rightly
and asking
so,
them
because that's what he did, right? It's
Right, but let's talk about Kevin Spacey, okay, as an example, okay? So for those of you who, I think it's on Prime, I think it's on Amazon Prime, for those of you who want to watch it, okay? If you look at like what's Kevin Spacey like has been credibly accused of, he has been incredibly accused of, I believe, sexually assaulting a boy who was 14 years old at a party. That is a credible sexual. That he was also, however, what the documentary exposes is not just that, because I think most people are aware of that. But what you might not be aware of is the fact that he repeatedly sexually harassed and almost sexually assaulted, I think in some cases actually sexually assaulted multiple men, many men over the years. It was not just one person, it was many, many examples. Most of these men, many of them were Marines. In fact, one of them was a Marine, and he's talked specifically about, I don't want to be too graphic, but he was told basically it was heavily implied to him that if he, was friendly, to Kevin Spacey, that maybe his career might improve, right? That maybe Kevin Spacey, because he was such a great actor, he might help to get him connections in Hollywood. And like one of the examples that he gives in the documentary is him sitting, with Kevin Spacey on a couch watching the scene of Omaha Beach, like in Saving Private Ryan. For those of you who don't know, that's a really gruesome scene. It's a scene basically where American soldiers, as they're landing on the beaches of Normandy, they're shot and they're killed, they're exploded. It's incredibly graphic and violent, but it's a good movie. You should see it. And in that, and what the Marines said was that Kevin Spacey basically started masturbating, like watching the scene
okay.
right next to him, and then basically tried to basically get the Marine right to sort of like play. And that wasn't the first example. There was another example of a man who he was brought upstairs, with Kevin Spacey, and he felt really uncomfortable. And so he took him, he kissed him full in the mouth and said, "Sorry, I can't do it." And then he busted out of there as fast as he could. There was a third case of a man who I think he actually did perform oral sex on like Kevin Spacey. And he was a straight man. He was not interested in Kevin Spacey, but he did it because he felt as though he had to. And the reason I'm bringing up these examples, okay, and I want to contrast them with Ellen DeGeneres, J.K. Rowling, Kamala Harris. Actually, Kamala Harris and like Hillary Clinton is we can get into some. It's not that any of these people, well, have some different opinions about J.K. Rowling, but it's not that you couldn't find critiques of all of these women that I've mentioned, okay? But let's face it, folks, they didn't suck. None of the women that I've mentioned so far sexually assaulted a 14-year-old boy when they got drunk at a party. None of them, have a story about them sitting on a couch, right? And masturbating to like the opening scene of Saving Private Ryan and trying to sexually coerce somebody into that doesn't want to be there. All of these people that I've mentioned, and even Amber Heard, who behaved extremely monstrously in her relationship with Johnny Depp, as far as I know, there's that example, and there's the history of her being abusive to an ex-girlfriend. Like those are the two examples of her being things. the level of scale of violence and of bad things that Harvey Weinstein, Kevin Spacey, that what's his face? He was the guy that said, "I believe I can fly." What is that guy? He's the
I
song
believe I can fly.
R.
I
Kelly. Yeah,
believe I can tell. Well, isn't R.
the
Kelly in
level.
prison?
Yeah, he's in prison. But the point is, right? Like you brought up
Which
Kevin
one of the
Spacey. One of
women
these
you
scandals.
mentioned are in
Like
prison?
why? Like why? Well, okay. Well, Amber Heard is not in prison, but she was required to pay. Like she lost the trial, and she's publicly embarrassed throughout the country. But the point is, right? Even though you could find reasonable critiques of like all of this pile of women that I've just mentioned, it's not the same. There's a reason why those people are like being candid. It's because the scale of badness is so bad that it could not possibly be ignored.
Hold on.
And people did ignore it for years, and they said nothing about it.
I agree with that last line you made, but let's look at the consequences that both of these groups have faced. Yes, one group did vastly worse things than the other, but they got vastly worse punishments, right? R. Kelly, at least I believe, someone could correct me if I'm wrong, but ain't he in jail? Ain't he done, right? Kevin Spacey went to trial. I think he actually got off on charges, so I don't know the truth of that. I could be wrong. And $10 from Psychonaut to say Lizzo was sexually assaulting her dancers and she isn't getting any penalization. But that's beside the point, right? Like yes, I think that we have an issue where we hold people, we pedestal people, and we shouldn't, and we have this like celebrity worship kind of culture, and then when they end up being like dirt bags because almost everyone who gets these powers does some shady shit, we are just shocked they behaved in these ways. I think that's worth discussing, but I just look, I don't know if I'm buying what you're selling here, but I before we forget, and I really want to know, and I don't know if Tuna's coming, so you're just gonna have to deal with me tonight. Thank you for the $10, Psychonaut. What's this? So, Girlbosses seen as a pejorative now. So, in contrast, people have started becoming snail girls and soft girls. What the fuck is a snail girl, and what the fuck is a soft girl?
Yes. So, and this ties into like what I was saying about this bucket of like female icons that are being knocked down one by one as being phony, inauthentic, not being feminist enough, not doing what they're supposed to because they're flawed individuals and they've done bad things. And I think I want to put
Are
a
you
bracket.
A snail girl?
You know, not really. Like we can talk more about that. I don't think so. I think like I'm more of an in between these two different like
a snail
sides.
hybrid. Okay.
Snail girl boss hybrid,
snail boss.
maybe. I don't know. Yeah, snail boss, exactly.
Okay.
So the reason why I brought up like these women is because I think that like having role models for young women is very, very important. Okay. It's important for young girls, for women as they're growing up, to have icons of female empowerment that they can look to and they can believe in. That's a source that shows them that you can be the president. Kamala Harris did it. You can be the presidential nominee. Hillary Clinton did it. You can be a female billionaire with your beautiful children's literature. J.K. Rowling did it. This is what young women have been taught for many, many years. But women are rejecting that. They are rejecting that, and they are turning to
Girlbosses. Firechild just gifted a 1 Wick TV membership in my YouTube. Girlboss isn't a pejorative to me. You're a girl boss, Firechild. Thank you for the money. Anyway, continue, please.
Yeah. So what the cultural trend is going back is moving away to, like the Gen Z response to the millennial girl boss archetype, is the snail girl. And I want to read you, and I will just be honest with you that I'm reading this. This is from for those of you who want to look at this, okay? This is from the Economic Times, okay?
So wait, the Economic Times is telling me, I just want everyone to hear this because this, am I dreaming right now? I don't know. This feels bizarre. The Economic Times is telling us what a snail girl is. This is where we're learning what a snail girl is from the Economic Times. Go ahead. Pitch it.
Okay. So this is, and just to be clear, this is from India, but like it is, but it still like represents like the idea pretty well. So snail girl is the opposite of girl boss, and it refers to one who prioritizes slowing things down and taking it easier on the job. It refers to workers who, instead of fanatically focusing on the grind, slow down and to be kind to themselves at work. Australian fashion designer Sienna introduced the term in her article, Snail Girl Era, Why I'm Slowing Down and Choosing to Be Happy Rather Than Busy. Explaining Snail Girl, she said, she goes slow, retreats when she needs, and follows the path at her own pace. She further says that it does not mean taking a holiday or not working at all. It simply means not being hard on oneself and striking a work-life balance. She also said that Snail Girl can look different to different people, but at the crux of it, it is about slowing down and being kinder to yourself. It's also about limiting your career goals. Sienna also recognizes the idea of slowing down at work comes from a place of financial privilege, and she understands that not everyone can follow it for financial reasons. However, she explains that everybody can incorporate a little snail girl into one's life without stopping the cash flow. So
Can
this
I
is
be
what
a
she
snail
is
girl?
saying. You can't because you're not a girl.
Fair enough.
But you can enter the soft boy, which is the other side,
Soft
which is
boy.
another response
Oh,
to
we'll
the
get
girl
into
boss.
those, but no, let's talk about the snail girl because I'm really curious, right? This feels like a horoscope. Honestly, when you're reading this, is like, oh, that's a Leo. You're just giving me a star sign here of someone who needs to take it slow, maybe lay off the career goals a little bit and just kind of love yourself. And it's these generic self-help platitudes, right? It doesn't feel real. Can you give me an example of someone you would consider a snail girl in real life, please?
In real life, my younger sister. My
Okay,
younger
your
sister
younger
is somebody who
sister,
I
some
would.
shade going on right now. You're calling your
Sorry.
younger sister a snail girl. Tell me more.
Well, so like what I mean by that is, and like, so for those of you who like are TikTok fanatics and like you're going through examples of these different, I don't know that they're actually representative of like fully representative of people, but like you can find these examples of women. What does the snail girl look like? Well, she looks like a girl who doesn't like try to work really hard so that she can become the VP of corporate. She's a girl that like it takes a lazy girl job. She works, she works to pay the bills, but she's doing it because she really wants to reinvest in her life. She really wants to take things slow. She wants to make sure that she's taking care of her mental health. She is a girl who doesn't want the neon pink suit. She doesn't want to go to Dillard's, right, and buy, the power suit with the shoulder pads. She wants to grow out her armpit hair to go thrifting at Goodwill, and she wants to buy the beautiful embroidered grandma sweater. And this goes into an entire like genre of media that you can find. Genres of media that like really.
I've heard this term. I've heard well, not this term, but I've heard the description you just gave. There's another term for it called hot girls. Hot girl shit, right?
Hot girl shit.
Hot girl shit. They don't work. They don't do much. They just kind of sit and someone takes care of them.
No,
and that's what it seems like to me, right? They don't want to work. They maybe get a lazy job, right, just to get some income. But what they're looking for is a meal ticket, okay? They're looking for a guy to come in and do all the guy bossing and just get paid to be hot, right?
Well, what you're talking about, like, is actually is actually the soft girl life, which is which is different from the snail girl life, but it is that. But yes, that is what the soft girl life is.
Okay, so there's a soft girl. What's the difference between a soft girl and a snail girl?
So the difference between the soft girl and the snail girl is that the snail girl explicitly is often like rejecting capitalism. Like her rejection of like becoming the VP and of like doing really well in her career is not because she objects to being financially independent and working for herself. It's that she doesn't want to work herself down to the bone, right, to achieve her goals. It's that she doesn't want to be the next female Steve Jobs. She is content simply to have, to have her garden,
Just
she's
low
often
ambition, which is fine.
Yeah,
there's nothing wrong with it.
Well, but she also often like is often critical of capitalism. She criticizes fast fashion. She criticizes, buying a cup from Starbucks, because of its support like of Israel. Like this is like more like really the snail.
Hold on. So we're bringing socialism into snail girlism. Are they intrinsically tied? Can you be a snail girl and be a capitalist?
I don't think so.
You don't think so? So in order to be a snail girl, you have to be some brand of not capitalist, so socialist, communist, something.
I think that like being a snail girl is often like I think it's more of a leftist,
I no longer like snail girls. Okay, gang.
Yeah,
snail girls, let's salt them. Okay, we got to get the salt in here.
Because oftentimes these people, their critique is different from the soft girl critique. So the Snail girl critique of the girl boss is like all the critiques that I mentioned to you before about the girl boss. One, that she's a fake feminist, that she profits off rhetoric about empowering women, but she's ultimately only in for money. Usually Snail girls, like women of this category, they criticize the girl boss because the girl boss is usually depicted as white. And so the girl boss is often constructed as a fixture of capitalism and of white supremacy, especially like if they could find examples of girl bosses who exploit employees and people of color or run them over.
But of the 5 girl bosses you mentioned, one was black, Kamala Harris. And that tracks with the aggregate of people of color to white people in America, right? So it seems like they're represented normally.
Well, no, that's actually my critique of the Snail girl. That's my critique of that's the reason why I wrote.
Are you anti-Snail girl?
I am anti-Snail girl, and this is part.
Are you anti-girl boss?
Not yes and no.
Yes and no. So it's a more thing. Are you anti-soft girl?
Yeah, I am anti-soft girl. I'm actually probably more Snail girl than I am soft girl. I would say
more anti-Snail girl than soft girl.
No, I'm more anti-soft girl than I am anti-Snail girl.
Okay, so you're more pro to the snails, but those softies can get it, right? Can get fucked. Okay, fuck them. But okay, fair enough. Carry on your point. I keep interrupting, but this is very curious to me, gang. And Tunin is not here, so I have to actually carry on the conversation here. But like this idea, it feels like, so in the manosphere, right? We talk about we have the alphas, the betas, the sigmas, right? All these types of horoscopes, basically. This feels just like that. It feels just like that, to be honest with you.
I would agree with you that these archetypes are limiting, and I would agree with you that they aren't. And I would agree with you that it's probably even misogynistic to say that someone is a girl boss or someone is a snail girl or someone is a soft girl. You have to be one of these things. But what I would say to you, again, going back to the stat that I told you before, representations in media matter. And even if the girl boss, is only an archetype and a thing that we construct, the fact of the matter is, when that archetype, when these messages are funneled into young people, especially young women, and they see these archetypes repeated over and over and over again, it impacts how they interact with the real world. It impacts the jobs that they want to get. It impacts the way that they handle their relationships. It impacts the way that they treat older women within the workplace themselves. It has so just because these are horoscopes, right? And they are horoscopes, and they don't fully encapsulate who we are. The fact of the matter is, you still have to care about them, right? The Fresh and Fit podcast is an idiot. Are the sigma, the beta, the alpha, is all that dumb? Sure.
Do you think that on the normies' lives, right? On out in the workforce, out in the social sphere, how influential do you think that Fresh and Fit is? I would say it's minuscule at best. And I would turn the question towards, if I may, and then you can answer both, right? And thank you for the $2, Songy Stu. Tuna smells bad. If only you invited Stu. Well, thank you for the $2. I appreciate you. Thank you. But how influential do you think these archetypes, for lack of a better term, is on how women are interacted with and interacting with each other?
So I just gave you the example before of the stat from the Wall Street Journal, but there's another stat that I could give you, which is the Reykjavik Index, and this was in 2020. Okay, it surveys attitudes across 37 different countries towards female leadership, and what it found was that 39% of men and 24% of women would not feel comfortable with a woman CEO. And this again goes back into the way that media, that real life women are portrayed in actual examples of media. Nearly 80% of digital and print media stories and companies in crisis cited the CEO as the source of blame when the company's leader was a woman. That was in 2016. That was the year this was the year that Hillary Clinton lost the election. And one of the things that people often said, and you're absolutely right, that people were highly critical of Hillary Clinton, but one of the calling cards to critique Hillary Clinton was especially from a lot of younger female voters was, okay, so Hillary Clinton is a woman and she's going to be the first female president, right? Well, I'm just supposed to vote for her because she's a woman, right? Well, what about who she is as a person? What about her policies, right? And it's not that isn't a fair thing to say, but the problem is, what I would say is that these represent that rhetoric has gone too far. I think that rhetoric has gone too far, and I think it's gone to the point where we have seen so many examples of like girl boss villains like represented in media, and I can give you more examples. And these examples that I'm giving you guys, okay, that like from The Boys, like we could talk about Game of Thrones, I Care a Lot. These are not, Twitch poll niche little things that people talk about, okay? This isn't like The Fresh and Fit. This isn't like these other things. These are films that people watch. Normies watch The Boys. Almost everybody has heard of like Game of Thrones. House of Cards is an example of the girl boss, aka Claire Underwood. Succession is a major HBO show. Shiv is an example of the girl boss. The Wilds in 2020, Gretchen Klein was an example of the girl boss.
What I'm hearing is you wanted representation in media as women having powerful figures, and now you're mad that you're getting representation in media.
No,
powerful figures, because again, powerful figures in media are generally seen as villainous in a lot of cases.
There is a very specific vitriol that is like given to specifically female like women who are empowered, and it's specific to women like, and the girl boss specifically that like I mentioned, it's specific. Well, I actually argue that like the roots of hatred towards the girl boss really date way, 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 way back, and you can find the roots of like hatred for like the woman going to work.
Give us the root of the girl boss hate. Where does this originate from, in your opinion? I know Tuna was supposed to be here to go down this path with you, but I'll do my best. Go ahead.
So one example I would give all of you, like, there's a movie like in 1988. It's called The Working Girl, okay? And in that, and I forget like what the main characters, the villain, the girl boss, the working woman's like.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, in 1988, like so for those of you who don't know, like there's an evil female boss, okay? And she looks like the working woman. She's not yet the girl boss, okay? She's wearing, the gray stocky suit. She's got the shoulder pads, right? And she's stealing all of like Melanie Griffith's ideas. And Melanie Griffith is contrasted with like this like dark, female working boss, in that like she is specifically criticized and like slammed she's told to get her bony ass out of here, okay? Her evil nature is linked to her less feminine frame. And by contrast, right, Melanie Griffith's like beauty, like her sex appeal, this is linked to her being intrinsically good. And so like so you can find examples of this like dating back, like, but even further beyond that, right? If we look at examples of women, like representations of female women who are in power, women, the troubled woman trope, that was a very common trope in literature, like in the early 20th century. And these are examples that many of you probably remember from your own like high school class. So I would offer you The Great Gatsby. I would offer you Of Mice and Men. There are some other examples that I could also offer you, but these are less well known. So if you'll just bear with me, I will give you those to you if you would. Henry James's Daisy Miller, Willa Cather's A Lost Lady, The Sun Also Rises, Edith Wharton's House of Mirth, Undine, Sister Carrie, Katie Chopin's The Awakening. All of these, like, consistently have a very specific trend across all of these books in the early 20th century, which is that there is an empowered, usually white female character that has a lot of money, and she is represented as the epitome of white supremacy. She is represented as the epitome of wealth, the epitome of everything that is evil within the society, right? Like this is probably common like knowledge, but some of you probably know this, right? And so the way that the novel tries to resolve this problem, the way that the novel tries to fix this problem, is that often there is a male protagonist who is often, a blue collar worker. This is Lenny, this is George, and he must destroy the empowered female, okay? Daisy Miller dies at the end of Henry James's novel. At the end of The Great Gatsby, Daisy is ruined, right? At the end of Mice and Men, the woman dies by the end of it. So this is very
for every
common.
example of this you can give me, I can give you a male example in the same role.
I don't think you can. I think there's something very specifically that happens, like for women specifically that are represented. They are represented as symbols of the nation. Hi, Tuna. Good to see you.
I love the facial hair, buddy.
So sorry, guys.
No,
I absolutely flowed my calendar. So I have all my preparation and everything, so I can have the talk. But I was so convinced that today was currently Thursday. So I'm waking up. I've taken my meds. I'm on the thing. But how are we doing?
Just hop in when you get a chance. We have, just to fill you in, gang. And gang, this is Tunachip, by the way. I've been doing my best Tunachip impression, but It is unfortunately not up to the task. But here's the thing. We've talked about snail girls. Do you know what a snail girl is? I didn't before this talk.
Yeah. So
We talked about
my
soft
girlfriend.
girls. Oh, your girlfriend's a snail girl?
My girlfriend's not a snail girl, but my girlfriend used to be a coder, and she had a pretty severe disability, chronic disability that she's gotten a procedure for. And like, there's a discourse inside of corporate America and a lot of these businesses for women that are in there where there's like this self-help, self-care type of thing. And snail girl, yeah, it just means slowing down and you could call it the tortoise and the hare thing, because it all justifies itself by the idea that true productivity comes by not overexerting yourself.
Gotcha. $10 from Psychonaut while you get set up and get all things ready. Every female, this is from Psychonaut, every female she brings as an example is getting blowback for their own actions. And with those giving pushback, a large part of that is coming from women. Women don't show up to support these women. Thank you for the $10.
So if I can just like give an example, like counter to that. So let's talk about like some of the books that I mentioned. So Henry James's Daisy Miller is a really good example of this. So one thing that you'll notice throughout lots of books in the early 20th century is that the troubled female character is often given a name, or she's associated with flowers, often associated with flowers. Daisy is a common name for a lot of female characters. And frankly, it was a very popular nickname in the early 20th century, like for young women at the time. And
so I wonder why all these female characters from that era have Daisy as a nickname. Crazy.
Well, so Daisy, why is the Daisy chosen? And it's not just the Daisy. So In Their Eyes Were Watching God, which is a wonderful book called Zora Neale Hurston, which also alludes and talks specifically about like white supremacy, but it talks about it from the perspective of a mixed race woman, like in the South. And what it talks about, like, she is represented by the pear blossoms, okay, by like these white flowers. Daisy is specifically brought up, and the daisy has to wilt by the end, okay? The daisy is deliberately chosen as a white common flower, as a flower that has to be thrown in the furnace, it has to die. And in fact, like in Daisy Miller, like in the case of Daisy Miller, like in Henry James's novel, like what happens in that book? Well, just a brief synopsis for those of you who don't know. In that book, what happens is there is a girl who it happens overseas. There is an American girl whose name is Daisy Miller, and she goes overseas and she epitomizes the United States. Her cheeks are full of color. She has straw blonde hair. She is pretty. She is not, like a cold European aristocrat. She is a tomboy, and the male protagonist loves her. In fact, very creepily loves her because he's much, much older than she is. But what ruins her by the end of the book is that she falls in love with an Italian, okay? And he's specifically referenced as a Roman.
Italians, okay?
And
it's always those Italians, but go on.
Well, the reason why it matters, right? So just to jolt everyone's memory about the racial politics of the early 20th century, if you were Italian in like the early 1900s, like you were not seen truly as fully white. So like for her to fall in love with this Italian man, right? For her to kiss him in the chapel, which is what happens in the book, when the male protagonist finds this out, he freaks out. He screams at her. He says that she's terrible. And within a few pages later, Daisy Miller dies, okay? She is dead, okay? Because she violated the social norms of the time, okay?
And that's why Girlbosses are bad today. Thank you for the gift sub, Admiral Gibbs. Give me more money, gang. Let's get some super.
Can I go ahead and I'm gonna interject with a wedge and try and get a foundation where I have the same grip. So my understanding of the conversation, and my understanding of your thread fairy, is that we are kind of, and me and Wick are at a disadvantage here, going into an intra-gender conversation about what it means to be going through this like economic, cultural, social shift. You're no longer expected to build a household. You're instead expected to be part of an economic unit. Some people still want you in that past. Some people want you just in that future. You're caught in the middle. What are you going to do exactly? What does it mean to be a liberal woman, conservative woman, Christian woman? There's such a heterogeneity of roles for women right now, and women have sort of been sold this idea that instead of picking one, instead of having that role given to you like it used to be, that you you kind of have to do all of them. And I think that that's where a lot of the tensions are coming from, because the idea of a girl boss is like not the same as a CEO. A CEO, like CEO culture, which I would call like male, man boss culture, or by equivalency, is like, here are all the hacks that I do. I don't have a wife. I don't have kids. I have it's sacrifice these things, forego these things, and then get them later. But women have been told from the cultural pushback on that, you can't forego these things. Your womb is drying up, your eggs are drying up. So because you're not allowed the same sort of like alpha grind set, retire, and then start a family in your 50s dialogue, women are caught at this point where they don't like the idea that they're being pushed into a role that they can't complete the success conditions of, such as CEO culture. They don't like the lack of ambition that comes with the old concept of being a woman, your sort of housewife thing. So what to do about that problem? What to do about that problem? You're, I think, touching on the idea that like there's a rebellion coming from liberal women where they're saying completely throw away the idea of ambition, but also throw away the concept of family and becoming a mother. I think of this as a sort of like bohemian, sort of like, it's not lesbian, but you identified it as maybe like being like culturally lesbian or politically lesbian movement of going your own way. It's women going their own way.
Speaking of culturally lesbian, we have a hype train on Twitch right now, so if you want to give some subs, now's the time. You too can be a cultural lesbian if you give to me within the next 5 minutes.
He wants you to run a train on this cultural lesbian. It's revenge. No, it's correctional. One could argue of the channel. No, okay. Sorry. Being real. What have you made as a decision? Because you're obviously like a person in this situation. We're just looking at it analytically. How do you feel about it emotionally? Where are you placed? And how are the women in your life, friends, bosses, family, how do they tend to answer that question?
So I will answer that question, but I will also like just bracket it off, right? Because I don't think like my thread was about motherhood, right? It was specifically about that, but it wasn't just about like rejecting being a mom, like literally being a mom. Like what I mean is that like it's rejecting the idea of domesticity and rejecting the idea of femininity. It's rejecting, like, it's not just you're rejecting being a mother, it's that you are rejecting your mom, right? You are rejecting, ascending to and by the mother, I don't mean you literally give birth to children, but I mean that you take responsibility as a leader. You take a responsibility as a leader with it, whether it's in a company, whether it's as a political candidate, whether it's as, regardless of what role we want to drop these people into, the Snail girl rejection of the girl boss is not just a rejection of them personally choosing to have children and to be domestic. It's a rejection. I think it's a cultural rejection of a group of liberal women who are rejecting the lives that their mothers had. Because, and this goes back to like what we were talking about the girl boss, because I gave lots of examples of how she's represented in media and how we construct it. But if we're being honest, right, our actual experience of women in the workplace, like most of our first experiences of what that looks like, it was not, watching Elizabeth Holmes, have a scandal on national TV. It wasn't even Hillary Clinton. It wasn't even, Sarah Palin running for like VP, back in 2008. The first example that we have, the vast majority of people, of the working woman, is your mom. Most moms work. Most moms there is the construction, the idea of the mother is the woman who stays at home, and she bakes, and she doesn't work, takes care. But
are you saying that our mothers, as relatively modern people born in the 80s, 90s, 2000s and such, do economic labor, or are you like, if you're touching on that point, then yeah, okay, makes sense.
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. And what I'm saying is, I think that when we're thinking about like women who are roughly, I think, our mother's age, right? So my mom was born in Generation X. My mom was a Gen X. So she was born like in the 70s. Like when we're thinking about women who grew up in the 70s and the 80s, this trope of the working woman was just coming into vogue at that time. Like just coming into the vogue at that time. And so for a lot of women, like from that time period, our memories of the working woman, it's not as this empowering, quote unquote boss babe VP. It's mom picking you up and dropping you off at daycare, right? And not being able to see you until the end of the day. It's mom working overtime. It's mom going to work, and coming home with tears running down her face and her pantyhose is ripped and 5 guys at the office called her a ton of names. It's mom like watching dad walk out, right? And having to be the sole family provider, right? For the family. That's the actual experience of motherhood that a lot of people have had. And so I think that it's that specifically, like that. I think a lot of young women like that have grown up with mothers who have experienced this, what they're rejecting is not necessarily the idea of having children, although I think I would agree with you that like political lesbianism and rejecting domesticity is a part of this and having kids. And I do think that conversation is there. But I also think what this is what they're really saying is, Mom, I don't want your life. I don't want to be like you, Mom. Yeah. That's what they're saying.
If I may, because I have some thoughts here too, right? So we say, and we look at this rejection as you're positing it, right? That that was the old, they don't like what it looked like, they're rejecting it. But when we look at other data, right? When we look at general happiness, when we look at satisfaction, things like that, it's clear that the previous generations had much higher ratings of that than the current ones do. So my question would be, is this rejecting of the more I don't even want to say traditional because it's not. It's the modern working woman. Is that is the rejection of the girl boss for the snail girl, just to use the terms we're using? Is it working? Is it making people better?
No, I don't think it is. And I think Tuna like had a point too about the happiness stats, which I'd be curious to hear. But what I am fundamentally saying, okay, which is the problem with the snail girl, the soft girl is especially bad, which we can get into. But the problem with the snail girl and the soft girl is first of all, I think that its rejection of capitalism is I think it's warranted. I think that there is like a great deal to critique, like women who ascend to positions of power and like don't do enough in order to make things equitable. I think there's a fair critique there. And I think that I think that there are fair critiques to be made, of women, of white women, assuming these roles but I also think that actually, right, that actually the snail girl critique of white supremacy and of capitalism is, I think it's unintentionally racist. And I think it's unintentionally racist towards demographics of women who work extremely hard in order to gain economic advantage, in order to become economic.
Those fucking snail girls, they're entitled. They don't know how hard the girl bosses had to work.
Like liberal racism is like kind of what I think it would be.
Yeah,
and it's like, I'll pause here. And
Tuna's trying to get in. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think that you're missing, and that you guys might be closer than you think on this, because I don't think that she's saying necessarily that the white women going into these positions and having these conversations from the interior are the people being racist, doing racist, so much as the language about it is, and the fact that there is a word for it is indicative of the difference in the role of white women inside of the workplace as opposed to black women and Mexican women. You look at who works harder than a woman that scrubs shit all day, is bending over, is doing all of this this labor, and there's not really a self-help narrative happening for all of the Latino janitors. There's not a lot of self-help conversation and partially because there's a different cultural answer inside of the black community as opposed to the white community for one reason or another. White women have
hold on. Isn't the term snail girl from India?
No, it's not. I mean, the Indian, like there was an Indian article that talked about it, but you can find examples like talking about snail girls.
We're talking about the American landscape, and Indians and blacks are different. They just are. They have a different culture. Indians share a culture with other Asians and whites that is the primary like corporate structure of the world. It is that upper echelon that is in the office positions and talking and doing the trading, everything. I'm talking about the darker skinned people that are working harder and are usually having conversations instead of talking about like, we need to pace ourselves, we need to do this, that, and the other. Conversations that come from having workplace agency where you can make those decisions in work. They're instead talking about, what am I going to do after work? What am I going to do for recreation? Which is the old model that everybody has talked about, that men usually continue to hold on to, which is this idea, I'm going to go out with the lads, I'm going to go to the club, I'm going to de-stress with some video games, with a book. You're going to find that outside of work, coping is more popular. And it's not because the white women are racist, it's because our opinion on white women's resilience is way lower than black women's resilience, Mexican. We think that you can throw everything at a black woman because we have this idea of like the strong black woman that takes it on the chin. It's more normal to see a single mother be black or Mexican than white. We have this waifish, dainty, fainting on the couch, dumb white woman concept.
We're too soft on the soft girls. Is that what you're saying? We're too soft on them? We need to be harder on the women? The white women specifically?
I mean, white women and Asian women tend to be depicted as sensitive little waifs.
So we need to toughen them up, is what you're saying.
It's not that we need to toughen them up. It's that we have to have a conversation about, one, is that true? Two, if it's true for white women, is it also true for these black women, but we're just not addressing it? And if it's not true, then it's a toughen up. If it is true, then it's a sort of like, what do you do about the fact that there is a weaker, more subject to anemic conditions, more sensitive to temperature? Like, what do we do when one half of the workforce is more sensitive? Do we make accommodations for that? Which the Snail girls are trying to say, as an individual, I will make accommodations for myself. They're not doing collective bartering. They're not trying to fight for this, that, or the other. Are we going to say, deal with it after work? That's sort of what we expect the black women to do. Or are we going to say, get over it. We need to have women and men work different jobs, which is sort of the conservative recuperation out of like Peterson.
$2.
I don't know what the answer would be because I don't have the data on whether or not women are actually genuinely experiencing burnout from the work itself or from the social culture that women engage in, which is personally a thing I think.
I'm gonna let Fairyqueen respond to that. But first of all, $2 from Psychonaut. What she is describing is a quote unquote luxury belief. But yeah, respond to that because I'm very curious, right? The workplace culture. I want to kind of talk about this within that setting. So Tunachip outlined a few options here and a few possibilities, right? Do you think that the workplace overly accommodates these women?
Again, like the short answer is I don't know because like just like Tuna, like I would have to have like the data like upped in order to like actually see if that's the case. My knee-jerk like reaction though is I think that like what Tunachip is pointing out like about burnout, I think that is a very real problem that a lot of working women face, especially like when he mentioned like Hispanic women who work and black women who work, women who are expected to appear to be really strong and to be extremely hardworking and push themselves to the grindstone, but are not given professional recognition. They're not given achievements. They're not given
to women.
Well, I'm specifically talking like, and I think what Tunachip was specifically talking about was black women and Hispanic women who are expected to have to be stronger and to take more of this on the chin as opposed to white. Like it is true that like there is a racist expectation that is placed upon them. I think that that's true. But I would also say to you, like, actually, you respond to that, Tuna, and then I'll go.
I'll just say I think a thing that you're maybe missing is I'm not saying that whites universally think that blacks and Hispanics can take it on the chin. I'm saying blacks and Hispanics expect of their own women, the women expect of themselves. It's a cultural narrative coming from both directions. It's just like the more matriarchal your culture is, and those cultures tend to be more matriarchal, at least in the United States currently, the more that you think of women as being a little bit tougher. You think of them as being able to take it a bit more. My mother, Italian, My father, Irish. The way that women are treated in those two different things, even though it's Irish American, Italian American, if you go back to the grandparents of both of them and what they were raised as, my grandmother is on my mother's side is the head of the household in all ways. The man is considered to be, I'm working, I get home, I'm lazy then. That's a little bit normal there. In the same way, you're going to expect the same thing out of Hispanic culture, very, very, very similar. And you're going to expect a much different thing out of, say, a German American. I'm working a white collar job. I am coming home, and I am also, I have a little bit more energy at the end of the day. The woman is expected to be off the hook. And that's kind of where a lot of the corporate culture has been fed by narratives like that. What we're saying is it's coming from the people that set those standards. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, but then I would say that, like, from the Snail girl perspective of the critique of the girl boss as being a fixture of white supremacy, like, I think that, like, that, like, does not encapsulate this, what you are describing. I don't think that it accounts for that. And I would also say that, like, that by constantly, like, I actually think that it undermines the achievements of Black women in the workforce. I think it undermines the difficulty that Asian women experience in gaining managerial positions. It's simply true. Like, this is a stat from 2021. Black women were in 2021 at least. They were the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs in the United States. And it's simply, and like when it comes to like Asian women, like this was true. Let's see, I'll find you the article in a second.
We'll get back to that. Finish your statement. We're going to go back to that Black women 2021 thing because there's a sad reality with that one that needs to be talked about.
That needs to be talked about. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's also true that like Asian women work extremely hard. It is very common for many Asian women to major in a STEM field, to seek for a career in STEM field, to train to become doctors, to train to become in chemistry. They train for these positions. And yet the fact of the matter is they don't become managers. They don't become CEOs. They don't become, the chief of staff, like of their medical team. They have the ability to have these careers. They have the education. They have the hard work. They have the know-how, but they aren't given the support that they need in order to ascend in the workforce, in order to become an actual boss. That cultural support is not there for them. And I would also think that the same is true for Black women. I don't think that we have enough support for them either in order to succeed, in order for them to become bosses. And so when I hear this critique from the Snail girls that says that like the girl boss is a fixture of white supremacy, I think it's probably fair to say that there are many white women who occupy these spaces. But when you say that and when you repeat that over and over and over again, it denigrates the ability for many of these women to achieve and to be successful who are not white. And it denigrates like the many achievements and accomplishments that they've had over the years. So
before I let Tuna respond, we're talking a lot about racial issues, and I prepared for gender issues, so I'm very curious, right, how these overlap and intersect. But I'm hearing a lot of chatter in my chat talking about why are these white people speaking for us, and that's a fair enough statement. But Tuna, you wanted to talk about the Black people, so go ahead, Tuna.
I want to talk about Black people. No, it's not just Black people, but it is about the 2021 entrepreneurial boom, which happened due to the subsidization of entrepreneurial startups in 2021 in response to COVID. A lot of loans. 2022 was filled with a massive number of foreclosures on those businesses. Those businesses failed hard. And this is kind of the problem with when people want just a handout of money, you need also like education paired with that, or else what we're going to see, and I'm still looking for the stats on this, whether or not these things will, you have to wait on these stats, is whether or not all of these businesses which were booming with Black women, that they actually just got caught in a bit of a trap, a bit of a snare, where it's you start up a business using this starting capital, you put work into it, but because you don't have connections, you don't understand business well enough because you're just a random person. We're not talking about people that went to school and this was their only chance. There were a lot of people that got and are continuing to be in some big fire. Like they are they're in business debt. It's not the same thing as, say, like paying off a loan that you can, the car loan. Oh, I'm sorry, I have $5. Will you take $5? There's not much renegotiation on a lot of these business loans. So I don't see that growth as genuine growth. I see that growth as more an offspurt of coronavirus, and I think that it's going to be a bad thing in the long term for Black women. And I think part of the reason that we see that disproportionate effect is just because lack of resources from the start, with a flat distribution of resources, meant that statistically the people with the lowest resources had the highest percentage of growth in that period. It's not because they were uniquely more entrepreneurial. It's because there was an influx of capital.
I'm going to ground this conversation because we have gone into the weeds really quick and into economic issues due to the coronavirus. And I want to really just bring it back to the foundational topic that we're going to be talking about today.
Yes, let's get back to women.
The remainder of this hour is women and women's role in society, women, how they're perceived in society and in the workplace, and etc. So let me just ask you, Tuna, and then I want to hear from Fairy Queen. We talk about how women face different challenges in the workforce, and that's fair. What support do they need? Because Fairy Queen, you've mentioned this several times, that women don't get these supports that men do. They don't get the same breaks that men do, right? What supports are needed for women to keep them from becoming evil snail girls? Go ahead.
So I have to answer the question slightly differently because I don't actually have the same position. So like things like snail girl being bad.
Well, you're going to give your position.
I'm going to bake it out.
She's going to give her position, get a little bit, and then I'm going to make you fight. But go ahead, give your position.
Yeah, exactly. We can get into the more nitty-gritty nuances. So I don't think that women need extra support nearly as much as the corporate culture needs to die, because the corporate culture is made out of these weird tensions. I think that workplaces need to be more democratically owned, and that people need to choose businesses where their coworkers and them have shared interest. You shouldn't work in waste management if you're weak. You shouldn't work in an office building if you don't work well in an office environment. So if businesses had an aligned workplace where everybody had the same interests inside of, say, a building, you separate the corporate interest and the labor interest, and you have it so that they have different rules, different standards, different HR departments, so that you don't have this kind of like federal versus state analog happening inside of businesses, then most of the complaints would go away. Most of the complaints would just dissipate. The unfortunate thing is that people are being driven by interests.
Is what you're saying?
Not just co-ops. I'm saying, like, when I say democratically structured, I don't mean like you get to make decisions for the entire thing. I'm saying that when you're inside of the office, the workers there get to choose what the rules are when it comes to the social. Like, you don't make it so that
whether you
half
can
of the
date
people,
your boss.
Yeah. So if you're
or coworkers or things.
Yeah.
Do we want people? Hold on. Let's talk about that. And I'm curious with Fairy Queen. Well, I'll ask Fairy Queen directly. How does that sound to you? Where the group that you're with, like, say you sign on to your new job, you're doing coding. I don't know, right? You sign on as a coder, and everyone in your workplace gets to vote on whether or not people can ask you out on dates in the workplace, right? Do you think that's a good thing or a bad thing? Why or why not?
It could be a good thing. It could be a bad thing. So I could see it going either direction. So I could see it being the case that, like, let's say, so this actually like recently happened. So like so everybody here probably remembers, like, back in Ohio a few months ago, like when the canvassing effort happened from DGG and from, I think, Progressive Victory.
Yeah.
Like, I know
you were there.
Well,
we were there together and we did karaoke, but go on.
That's awesome. But like what I remember specifically that was critiqued about that event was that there were a lot of women who were hit on by men at the event and who complained about it afterwards. And it was to the degree that there was an entire discussion about it, like on Destiny's stream between Kyla, Destiny, and I'm not sure if it was Dan, but I know it was like some other person associated with DGG. I think it was Dan, but I'm not sure. So so the issue becomes, right? So let's say, like, let's use that as an example, right? You're a woman, right, at the canvassing event, right? You're one of the few people there, right? And let's say that, like, all of the people there, like, democratically vote, right, on whether or not, you know, you should use the Bumble rule, right, when asking somebody out, right? Well, you know, if you're
What's the Bumble rule?
The Bumble rule.
Women ask first.
Women ask first.
Take the initiative because it's a male-dominated space. Women take the initiative. That's the idea.
Fair enough.
Yeah. So like, let's say like you're one of, I don't know how many women were there, but let's just say let's just say we have 10 men there, right? And you have 2 women here, right? And like you have like the majority of men that think that it's okay, right, to ask them out, right? They don't think it's a problem, right? But the very 2 women who are in the back of the room do think it's a problem and do not want to be asked out. And they all come together, and like you're going to have the same problem as the Electoral College, right? You're going to have the same problem that is like associated with all democracy, which is what are you going to do, right? In companies and in corporations where you have a minority group of people, right, who, because they are a minority, like within that community, how is their voice properly represented? How do you make sure that like the few girls in DGG who don't want to get hit on by 8,000 people actually have a voice and are actually able to say something? Because their little vote, like when they put it in to like vote to what to say it, it's worth just as much as every single one of the 8 men who are going to vote differently. So that would be my question about, but I'm not against it in principle, right? I like the idea of like a corporate culture, like where things are democratically decided. I like that idea in theory, but I question it in practice. I question like what the impact would be on not just women, but on like different groups of like Black people, on gay people, et cetera.
To use the Bumble reference, Bumble had to do away with their rule that you called it. I just Googled it. I looked it up because women complained about it because they didn't like having to approach first. But anyway, fun factoid. Tuna?
I'm not going to be as worried as Fairyqueen is about a corporate culture being too male-dominated because that is already being addressed separately. Women are going to business more than men are. I think, and good on it, I advocate for men to... The best thing for men to do would be, especially young men who are able-bodied and all this fancy knowledge or fancy language, you should be doing something manual.
Okay. I want to cut this off, right? Because I don't want to talk about men today. I want to talk about women.
Well, no.
What's in your opinion, a woman who is growing up, who is just getting into the workforce, what should they do?
I think that I want to respond to the thing fully. It's not just when we talk about men, we talk about women. When we talk about women, we talk about men because they fuck each other. They date each other. They love each other, right? And they meet each other in work all the time. So what I'm saying is that problems like what are being discussed there, first off, let's say take a workplace where the DGG thing happens. Number one, more women are going in, so I think it solves itself. But also, you're scaring the hoes. If you're scaring the hoes and all the hoes leave, and the guys want the hoes to be there, if you just use that common parlance, the guys are going to police one another. We have language inside of male culture that says, stop doing shit that makes women uncomfortable already. Men want women to be present, so they're going to police it internally. I think most of the financial pressures, which are inside of the business, will also make it so that men that are making women uncomfortable, especially talented women that decide to then go to a different business, will be fired for it. Just because the corporate culture could be, presented where it's like, let's say you do have a democratic vote on something that's ostentatious. It's not just hit on. It's like, are we allowed to play that game where you undo the zipper and you put your finger through it and pretend it's your penis? Are we allowed to do that as a joke? And like some women complain about it. This is the type of thing that you would expect inside of a corporate environment that's like a boys' club, the stereotype. The women want to stop us doing the fun finger through the zipper game.
Frankly, is that what? Go on.
Okay, I don't know where you've worked, but
I worked in the military, and I'm telling you, on the flight line and the maintenance truck, right, I saw some shit, Okay, I saw some shit, but I never saw the zipper game. Okay, maybe because our suits didn't have zippers, right? But
see the game where people would put their nuts on people's face or something while they were sleeping. Like, know that people there are male rituals of, social dominance as a joke that women find particularly untasteful. Whatever your analog is for the finger through the zipper game, which I think is primarily also a TV manifestation joke kind of thing. Right. If it's the type of thing that is getting in the way of people being productive, business are going to make that choice anyway, because people want their job to continue existing. Men don't just vote with their social interest. They vote with their wallet too.
It's a self-regulating system already.
I think it solves itself. Okay. Exactly.
Fairyqueen, you were making some faces. I sense you disagree.
I kind of disagree, and I disagree because you're right that people do vote for their wallets, right? But I think like these two, like the social, I don't want to say your social class, but the social like identity that you are a part of, okay, the category that you fall into, these two things do play into your wallet, right? So let's say you're a man in this corporate culture, right? And you have a woman, right, who might be really, really great, right? And she's after your job, right? She's after your job. She wants your job. She wants to be the new, Don Draper, let's say. Well, what does Don Draper have in his back pocket, right? Well, he has the fact that he's a man and she's a woman, and therefore he can use that fact as a way to sort of imply that like he is the better option to have anyway, right? So it's not that you're wrong. I do think that like ultimately people vote with their dollar, right?
Sword. Hold on, that's a double-edged sword. But having a woman as your top is a selling point to many in cultural in corporate
women
culture.
Also have the assumed innocence category as well, which has been leveraged in the same way that the Dom Draper effect you can nowadays, not back then, obviously inside of the Mad Men analogy that we're pulling the name from. And I do think that the corporate culture is more leaning towards hashtag believe women than hashtag she's
I want to give Fairyqueen a chance to finish. I interrupted her. I'm sorry.
I hate to be a doomer about this, and I know that the stat is old. So if anybody if you have a new stat that like shows something differently, please drop it in like the stat. I'll keep bringing it back to the Wall Street Journal from 2016. 80% of digital and print media stories about companies in crisis cited the CEO as the source of blame when the company's leader was a woman. And we do have statistics that do show that like women in leadership are generally like viewed more negatively. They are generally less desired, and that people are generally less enthusiastic about having like a female leader as opposed to having a male leader. And so like, while I don't disagree with you that like it is a selling point that like companies have, oh, we have a female CEO, oh, we have a female boss, oh, we have a woman in this position. I don't disagree with you that has been a selling point. But what I'm also saying, which is, again, this brings it back to the girl boss critique in the first place, is that we are seeing a cultural backlash to that big time. Okay. That would have been a really good selling point probably amongst corporate culture, way more probably in like 2016, way more probably in 2010, when it was the era of Sophia Amorosa, right? Like when that was the point, probably being able to say, look, I have a female VP of corporate, and this is great, and this is why you should. But today, we are in the era of like critiquing woke capitalism. We are in the era of saying that like having that as a selling point for your company is a point of hypocrisy, right? That's empty and that it's hollow, and that's saying over and over again, well, you're only saying that to me because you would never say that to a man. That is now like a dog whistle for a woman like basically trying to get away with like immoral behavior. So I don't disagree with you that it has been used as like a selling point, but I think what we're experiencing, which is again like what I'm talking about, that's being critiqued. And
I'll finish your point, but then I have a question for you.
Yeah, and I also just wanted to respond to something that somebody in chat said earlier, which is why we were talking about race a lot earlier. Okay,
chat. And you're responding to chat. Okay, carry on.
I am. The reason why me and Tuna, why we were specifically talking about that is because the girl boss is critiqued and because she is seen as racist. Because she is seen as a vessel for white supremacy. And that is a very specific critique that like people have of the girl boss. And so in order to properly dissect and understand the girl boss archetype and understand how it impacts women, we can't just simply talk about girl boss as though it affects this all women equally. We have to talk about like the way that it's viewed differently across different racial and ethnic groups, across different classes. Like I don't even know if sexuality probably is important to bring up here too. Like Ellen DeGeneres, she was the gay girl boss for a while too. Today, like lesbianism, like you mentioned, political lesbianism.
Obviously, we've got Beyonce and the sweatshops was a conversation about whether her merchandise being unethically sourced was taken more or less seriously based on her race and based on her sex. It's constant. And this is the reason that we were bringing up race, is that I have a theory about what's going on inside of white women's own social categorization and decisions about these, which is that white women in America have started identifying more as white than as women. They think of themselves and their moral responsibilities as coming from their race more so than their sex, because, and I think they're probably right about this, more progress has been made on the sexual equality than racial equality in America, Rang. And they're very guilty about that. They very much so feel as if there's a sinking ship and they got off the boat without them. You talk to white women, they are going to express a sense of solidarity that they have gotten the better end of the stick. White women think of themselves as privileged now.
Where are you getting this information from?
Well, first off, I got a white woman right here.
True. I can confirm, yeah.
So you identify more with being white than being a woman?
No. What I'm saying is the construction of what it is to be a white woman, that like what Tunachip is identifying, is true for millions of white women, especially white liberal women who are young, who are about mine and Tunachip's age or younger. Okay, that is especially true for Generation Z and for millennial women, where it is simply true that like a lot of young white liberal women do experience a great deal of guilt as feeling as though they are perpetuating like white supremacy or perpetuating racism. Yeah. That is true. Okay,
they talk about that a lot. You don't have an Instagram account. You're not in the female dominated cultural landscape. You're following women on Twitter. And DGG women don't live in a longhouse. They live in the male cultural sphere for sure. Like they live.
Y'all making a lot of assumptions about who I'm following on all these social media.
That's true.
A lot of assumptions. That's all I'm saying. But go on.
I know.
Tell me more
I'm talking about
life.
Your public,
please.
Not your private Twitter account. To be clear. I'm sure that on the private, you're following a lot of female influencers.
Yes, okay. And just to be very clear, so Tunachip, I agree with you that is definitely something that like white liberal women who are millennials and who are of Generation Z, that is definitely something that they are experiencing. I do think that it is very true. But this is a point of disagreement that I have with you, is that I also think that there is a heavy rejection of viewing themselves or thinking of themselves as women. And I think that like this ties back, I think we talked a little about this, like, I hope you don't mind, like we talked about like becoming the mother. And I think you said that you thought that like basically that what they are rejecting is not becoming the mother. They are rejecting becoming the father. They are rejecting, like, assuming, like, that is the archetype that they are rejecting. But I disagree.
And to be clear, it's because mother, period, is considered a disintegrated role, and father is considered like a woman.
I gotta jump in here. Because we're getting away from the question I really wanted to ask to kind of put a pin in this. And there's a couple questions before we get off to the mother stuff, right? Sure. I want to ask these questions because I think they're important to the discussion to understand, right?
Rattle.
So the first question I would have, and this is to you primarily, Fairy Queen, but I'm curious what your thoughts are. Because we got a little bit away from this, but just to refresh my chat's memory, we were talking about nowadays, according to Fairy Queen, she's positing that it is no longer a selling point to say I have a woman or I have this diversity hire in my company, in my purview, in my sphere, that now it's less of a selling point. I disagree, and I just want to get a temperature check here. Today, in 2024, who do you think has an easier time getting employment? Do you think it's the average man or the average woman?
An interview?
Employment.
Employment. I thought you said appointment. Okay, employment. Who's
employment? Just a temperature check. I'm just
quantity.
I want to hear from
sheer quantity or like the job they want.
Percentage. If I'm going for a job, for the job you want. So if I'm going, if I apply for a job that I want, and a woman applies for a job, same job, which of us, again, same qualifications, which of us do you think is more likely to get hired?
So my temperature take on it is I would agree with you that I think that there is pressure like within corporate culture and in general to hire women preferentially over men. So I would probably maybe agree with you that like women probably have an edge when it comes to hiring. But where I would disagree with you is, and I know you're going to heavily focus on being hired and getting your foot in the door, is do those women stay, right? Do those women like stay in those jobs? And once they have those jobs, do they ascend? Do they make partner, right? Do they become the chief of staff?
Let's separate those two. Let's separate those two, because in the first one, I would say, no, they don't often stay. They job hop because they can. And the second one, though, I think you have more of a point. The second one, I would agree with you. That's more of a point. That they may, I don't know the data on this, right? But they may have trouble ascending the corporate ladder, so to speak, than a man does. I don't know the data on that. But when it comes to like job hopping, that's often seen as a positive thing. The ability to go into different industries. If you're just bored, if you're a soft girl, okay, and right, you've been they're taking away your soft girl privileges at the counter, okay, or your snail girl privileges, and so you're just like, okay, I'll just go somewhere else.
Well, this is honestly a point of, actually, I think this is a very legitimate critique of girl bossing. I think this is a critique from the Snail girls. This actually is not a critique from Snail girls, but this is a critique that I've read. It's a wonderful book. What is it called? The Nanny Wars by Caitlin Flanagan. It's an article in The Atlantic. It's very, very long. It's very, very well written. And what it talks about basically, it's called How Serfdom Saved the Women's Movement. That's what it's called. And what it specifically talks about is how and why these women did ascend, like in the corporate ladder. Like, why were these women able to become CEOs? Why were they able to become federal judges? Why were they able to do this? And the reason why so many of these women were able to ascend up the corporate ladder and be parents, because there's huge pressure upon women, and that was far more true 20 years ago than it is today, to be moms. How do they balance life and work? Well, they got a nanny. That's how they did it. They hired a nanny. And who is the nanny, typically speaking?
Women winning. Women stay W's. Okay.
It's the secondary topic that chat doesn't like us bringing up continuously that we're going to do again.
Yeah, but it matters to bring it up, right? Because I think this is a very legitimate. Yeah, it's usually Hispanic women. It's usually women who are immigrants who often speak limited English. Often it's women who who are undocumented immigrants who are afraid of losing their jobs. And so when they're employed by these women, it's often the case that their employers pay them under the table. And these women who employ them often feel a great deal of stress and anxiety about the fact that a nanny is taking care of their kid, because they feel as though an internal sense of guilt about this, which they often take out as rage against their nannies. So it's not uncommon for many of these nannies to work for these highly professional women who make a lot of money, but then the nanny does something and she goes a bit too far. Maybe it's that the kid calls the nanny mom. Maybe it's that the nanny, does something like maybe she toilet trains the kid wrong. She does something that steps on the mom's toes a bit too much. And just like that, she goes from being a valued, treasured, supposed member of the family to being out on the doorstep with her suitcase in hand, fired instantly at the drop of the hat. And this is the critique that Caitlin Flanagan makes. Because she's paid under the table and often paid in cash, she doesn't have Social Security benefits. She gets none of them because they're not reported. They're not reported on their taxes. In fact, I think there are a couple of cases of women who have hired nannies who are undocumented immigrants, and then they get in trouble on their taxes. They get in trouble for tax fraud because they don't report, this income. They don't report the fact that they paid for these nanny services for so long, and often are abusive to these nannies. And I think that is a very legitimate critique of girl boss culture, is the fact that many of these women who are employed by these professional women, I'm talking specifically about childcare nannies, they are absolutely often taken advantage of by these.
That seems like an industry specific issue rather than a systemic issue overall.
Oh, I disagree. I think it's very systemic. Childcare and finding childcare
within the industry. Yes.
I kind of see what you mean, but I just don't think that the difference you're talking about is particularly substantive. We talked about the Indian culture. Indian culture is extremely pro nanny. It has been for a long time. The idea that a mother can do the job on her own is sort of not normalized, and they make fun of American women for, number one, thinking they can enter the workplace when they're already, just by being a mother, a stay-at-home mother, that's already too much work, unreasonable, unsatiable, and it is held up by their class infrastructure. Our corporate culture is held up by our class infrastructure too. Like, we are turning a blind eye to these immigrant women coming in because they raise the children, they fill the floors of the Amazon warehouse, and that is what allows women that want to ascend up a corporate ladder, that have the linguistic, financial opportunities to do so, take advantage of these services. Same thing with like your dying parents. Caretakers of all forms are filled by these immigrant roles of desperate people who can't get better work. It's integral.
I would agree with you. And I actually don't know enough about Indian culture really to comment on like the nanny culture that exists like within Indian culture. But what I can tell you is, at least from like my perspective, is that there seems to be a very particular type of vitriol that's like sent towards professional women. Well, not towards professional women, that's often directed towards these like immigrant working women who work as nannies for these places. And it's not that you're wrong. It is true that like immigrant women often fulfill other types of domestic labor, such as working as caregivers, such as working as nurses, such as working in nursing homes, et cetera, et cetera. But the key thing that makes it distinctive is that it is the support beam by which like these professional women can gain corporate power and can gain economic power and can arise and ascend throughout the workforce. And that is specific to women in a way that is not specific to men, because men don't have this internal, at least I don't think they have this internal fear, right? Am I less of a dad if I hire a nanny, right, to take care of the kid so that I can go and make like $80,000 as a doctor, right? Yeah, but I think for women, they often receive a ton of flack back for choosing to do that, especially if they choose to put their kids in daycare, which is often something that women are specifically criticized for.
So yes,
internally,
that's correct. But when we talk about like one of the criticisms that a lot of men get that I've seen, right, men my age specifically, is absentee father, right? They aren't there enough with their kids, especially if they've gone through a divorce or if they have, baby mamas out there. Men, especially, look down on these other men for doing this. Now, I'm not talking about the fresh and fit types. I don't consider them good role models at all. I think they're very bad.
Are you talking about physically? Are you talking about physically or emotionally unavailable?
Both in this case, right? A lot of them just don't prioritize. Like, if you were seen as being an absentee father, it is a black mark in a lot of the male cultures that I run in.
Sure.
Again, I can't speak for everyone, obviously. But this is something that I think that men do feel shame for. They do feel pressure societally to be there for their kids, and they should feel more. And yes, I don't think it's as much as mothers, but I think it's there. But I just wanted to interject that, but continue on.
For one reason or another, women just seem to be more sensitive to internal cultural critique than men are. I feel like men...
How do you mean?
What do you...
I think they're more comfortable sharing their...
Okay.
Oh, let me, because here's my hypothesis here. Men are less comfortable sharing that they are being sensitive because they feel that their feelings just aren't taken into account. Whereas women have no problem complaining all the time about everything, right? Just to be a little hyperbolic, right? But if they say that they are having a struggle, they feel entitled for other people to care and listen in a way that men don't.
In part, I see what you mean, but when I say that men seem to be more able to, I mean that men seem to be more able to shrug it off. Men also, there's a much more popular counter argument for men than women, which is mind your own business, get out my shit, why you brown nosing? It's our sphere of influence. We care a lot about like one, maybe two layers of abstraction, but like women, I don't know if it's an emotional, cultural, social, I don't know what it is, but women care a lot. And the Barbie scene, the stupid American Ferrera rant is entirely about this, which is that women seem to care about far more layers of abstraction than men do in terms of their cultural judgment. A woman cares about what the corporate world, her parents, her other people inside of her cultural community, if she's not sort of like de-ethnicized. She cares what her friends think. She cares about what her partner thinks and her kid thinks all at once, and the contradictions between the two make her feel like she's being suffocated. I think that dudes feel a lot more ready to just cut off and disregard. I don't care what Wick thinks about my sex life. I don't care what Wick thinks about how I treat my girlfriend.
Yeah, but I just read an
I could
article
listen
today.
to him and have a conversation, and if I agree with his points, I can say Wick's right about that point. But I don't care about it because Wick is Wick. If I was a woman and I had a woman that I have conversations about deep topics of life, it'd be strange for me to care not at all what she thinks about my relationship and how I carry myself in it.
So let me get while I get this tweet up, because I think you're wrong, and I want to cite an article, but Fairyqueen, respond, please.
I just also wanted to say too, I think that like, and I'll just go back to media representations that are normie media representations of the absentee of an absentee father, and not the father that abandons his children and leaves them, but the father who, because he is so consumed with work, because he is working all the time to provide for them. In like just off the cuff, like I can think of like a couple of like four different fathers. Okay, I can think of Walter White, Don Draper, Tony Soprano, and like who's the last one? I think it's whoever Adam Sandler's character is in the Click movie, okay? Because what I remember seeing from these like different representations of dads who are really working really hard at work, okay? They are killing it at work, okay? They are giving themselves, they are selling their souls to their bosses, okay? These narratives usually portray the male protagonist, even if he's flawed and even though he is misguided in giving himself too much to his job and too much to his labor, he is ultimately a sympathetic character. He is a character who needs to be redeemed by the conclusion of the series. And his work, and oftentimes like his work ethic, the fact and the reason why he's doing, like, why is chopping up, why is Tony Soprano shooting up people? Why is he the garbage man? Why is he killing people? Well, it's because he wants to pay for his daughter, Meadow, to go to Georgetown, to go to Columbia, okay? Why is Walter White, right, selling methamphetamine? And why is he, like, really pressuring Jesse into killing Tuco? It's because he wants to make sure that he has enough money to get to his family so that when he dies,
that was true in the first season. Let's do the Walter White thing. That no longer was true.
Hang on. But
yeah, as he went on.
By the conclusion of the series, by the end of Breaking Bad,
Walter White was a bad guy.
But yeah, but hang on, right? It's not that like these characters aren't critiqued, and like not even that they aren't revealed as bad characters. But their journey, it is a three-dimensional journey. It is a journey that is humanized. You often receive a lot of scenes in the very beginning of those series about their childhood, where they came from. Don Draper, we learn, why does he give himself so much to corporate culture? Why is he going and doing this over and over again?
Because
why? He was abused as a child, because he grew up in poverty. Because
you'll
he had
actually
to
like this point.
That's why.
You'll actually like this point. It's because authors, screenwriters, and things, they write women characters as women, whereas men characters are written as characters. That's the difference.
What do you mean when you say that?
So they are women characters, when they're written in books and stories, screenplays, especially nowadays, are meant to represent women, right? They are designed by that way. We have to take care to make sure that the women are represented in this, and we're going to make sure that this is a good representation of women and however we want to portray it. Whereas a man character, they don't have those same issues. They're just written as a character. And I think that there's something within that juxtaposition here that turns out slop. Let's just be clear. Slop.
So I kind of agree and I disagree with you. So I would agree with you that oftentimes, like when a female character is written, that she is often written to embody, womanhood. Like I think that that is true, that she's like sort of like it's the archetype problem that we mentioned earlier, the sigma, beta, alpha problem with men, the snail girl, soft girl, girl boss, Madonna whore, all of these things for women, right? Like I think I would agree with you that that's true. But what I would say to you is like maybe Walter White isn't a good example, but at least for two of those examples, for Tony, I mean, even like Adam Sandler's character, whatever his name is in Click, right? Tony,
it was a bad movie.
It's a bad movie. It is a very bad movie. But, right, what is Adam Sandler's thing? Adam Sandler as an actor, like frequently throughout these films, he kind of fulfills a role of the dad archetype. He's kind of the everyman, right? He's not especially fit, right? He has a generic looking face. He is supposed to embody the role of like working, normal, average, everyman American dads, right? And for Tony Soprano and for Don Draper, I mean, both of them are meant to represent a very particular type of man. Like there are so many people, like my mom, like so many people. This is not, and I know that this is not just my mom because you could read lots of articles that say this, that when they say that when people of Gen X say that they watch Don Draper like in Mad Men, they say, that is my dad. That is just like what my dad was like growing up. And like, there's even like apparently like there was an article that was written about Mad Men that was from, what was his name? Matt Weiner, is that like his name? Like the creator of Mad Men. And what it proposed was there is a reason why they chose John Hamm to be Don Draper. He wanted a Gregory Peck kind of looking guy. He wanted a guy that reminded everyone of the old Hollywood, of the old actors. The guy who was supposed to be, like what about Gary Cooper?
Stereotypes.
Yes,
right?
I am talking about stereotypes. What
and
I'm
there
saying
are different
is
stereotypes for men. And there are different stereotypes for women. This is just
yes,
true.
But this saying, right? Like why? Like what happened to men, right? Where is Gary Cooper gone? Where is the old, strong, silent type? That was a thing that Tony Soprano said, okay? And he is supposed to be the ironic critique of another archetype of maleness, which is the Godfather, right? The Godfather was hugely influential on male culture. I think it's hugely influential on, there are lots of men who watch that film, who see the idealized, stylized gangster life, right, of like the Italian mafia. And
what happened to men? I'll tell you what happened to men. You happened, Fairy Queen. Snail girls. Soft girls and snail girls. You ruined us. You ruined us.
Well, hang on. I think that like these, like Tony Soprano is sort of an ironic stereotype. Don Draper is deliberately supposed to be a stereotype. He's supposed to embody the idea of the self-made American man who looks like Gary Cooper, who has a beautiful blonde wife, who has 2 kids, and who has a dog and a great house in the Hamptons, and he has a great killer job. And he is picked to pieces throughout the series, drink by drink by drink by drink. He loses everything. He gets divorced. His whole life is exposed to be a lie. This is not just a critique of Don Draper as the character. It's a critique of American concepts of masculinity on whole. Like that's
sure, it's a story, right?
Yeah.
Lick, let's go back to the thing that you said again, and also this sentence here, the thing that you said before, which is you're talking about stereotypes. You know this is a story, right? And I think that Click's a bad example, and you critique the use of Click, and I think there's a good reason to say that Click shouldn't be held into this, because it's an enduring story that people identify with and construct their own identity. No, Click is not.
Oh, okay,
Click is not. Click is a failure to do this. Click does, nobody watches, I mean, Fairyqueen is one of the few people that doesn't need to type Click plot synopsis into Google Chrome right now to have this conversation make any sense. Click is a nobody movie specifically because nobody wants to, yet everybody kind of can identify with that character, which is the fact that you are being strangled for time. You have more things going on in your life than you actually have time for, and that's because, and it does reflect as a it is attempting to be a critique of the American dream inside of the modern American landscape, but we don't want that. We want a reassuring message for what we should be going into the future, which is why all of these things make sense. Tony Soprano is going through the transition from the old world to the new world, watching every gangster around him be Americanized, lose their ethnicity. Fucking the one guy, they visit Italy and he said, "Where's the gravy?" He's looking for tomato sauce, and everyone around him's looking at him. It's like, you do know that you're a pig to us. You do know that you're like uncultured swine to us. And that's like that's why that one makes sense, because Tony represents somebody who is desperately trying to hold on to something that is fading away. Tony is a relatable character in that way. All the while, the whole point of The Sopranos, I would agree, and the reason that's the hook. The payload of The Sopranos is to then make you, in seasons 5 forward, start watching his life fall apart and ask the question, wait a second, does Italian American culture have a problem where all of the men have mother issues they don't address, and they're eating away at them, and they're burying it inside of a phony masculinity?
Bring this
That's
back
what
to
the
the
show's
point.
meant to be about.
Bring this back to the topic. Let's bring it back to the topic. Go ahead, please.
So what I'm saying, and I will say, is that why is Click a failure? Yet Uncut Gems also portraying an extreme failure. Just you keep with Adam Sandler, and why is it that Adam Sandler suddenly is respected for a role for once?
The dialogue was bad. The plot was bad, right? Look.
You're not meant to empathize with Adam Sandler inside of Uncut Gems. He's Icarus. He's a loser. He's a failure. He's more like my dad than Click is like my dad, or Don Draper is like my dad. And that's why I think that movie came out at the time that it has, and is coming out more, which is, we are inside of culture. And this is my disagreement with Fairy Queen. We're in a culture now which is primarily obsessed with this sort of postmodern critique of the old form of masculinity. All it wants to do is deconstruct masculinity. It's not producing an alternative. And all the cultural progress and positive motion is being granted to women.
So go ahead.
Well, if I may, I really like I think that it's really interesting that you brought up like how it specifically affects Italian Americans and like their construction of masculinity. I hadn't considered that, but like it's interesting that you brought that up in relation to Tony Soprano. But what I would say about The Sopranos too, and I think this is true for Mad Men and The Sopranos, I don't know if Walter White is really the same. I'd be curious if anybody has an argument for the same. It's not simply that, that the glory days are gone. It's not just simply that like the old ways like are fading away and disappearing. The exposure of both Mad Men and The Sopranos is that the glory days were a lie. They never really existed. Yeah. Tony Soprano like believes that they were these great glory days, but really Livia Soprano was incredibly abusive, right? Johnny Soprano, the man that he looked up to, the man that he loved. Like one of the scenes that we actually see of him, he's cracking a clay pot over a guy's head, and he's beating the crap out of him, saying, "Rocco, give me my money!" Right?
I have a confession.
Seeing him taking, we're seeing
I have a confession. I've not watched The Sopranos.
We spoiling The Sopranos for you right now?
I've not watched The Sopranos, gang. I've never seen it. Not a single episode.
You're not an HBO hobo? You haven't sat on the couch and watched 1,000 hours of Gabagool? What the fucking... You're queer? You're gonna be queer right now. Yeah, it's a good show. It's funny. But
it's a good
anyway.
show. Yeah.
But like, so when we say it's permeated culture,
it has.
It has,
you know that there are millions of memes, and people do reference The Sopranos very often, and it's also worth talking about like The Sopranos created this like entire genre that Breaking Bad.
I think we're but I think we're leaning. I think we're leaning way too much on media representation to make our points. Right? I get you.
This isn't about media representation. We're making like a sort of like folklore assertion, which is that the stuff that we remember, the stuff we talk about, the reason why is because it embodies something that we are all processing collectively right now, which is the change in the role of men and the change of the role in women. Now we can go back to put the media on a shelf and talk about why, because we're saying this is why we think these things are effective and why people keep talking about them, because they're still going through those problems, and just go back to talking about the problems themselves. But like, that's the whole reason.
No, I understand it. I just think we're overplaying our hand here. I wanted to talk a little bit. We only have a limited time, unfortunately.
Yeah, let's get press facts.
You were a little late, so we.
It's my bad. Sorry, man.
It's all good. We'll do this again. I'm enjoying the conversation.
Me and Ferry are going to be talking after this anyway, so we'll get to unpack more of it.
Tunachip or something, or whichever everyone's streaming. But I guess there is data to suggest. This is the article I was looking for, right? Just to confirm but that men's friendships, right, are more stable than women to women friendships, right? So women to women friendships tend to be a lot more volatile, and they tend to not be as strong and lasting as men friendships, right? Um, what do we think? Do we think the concept of girl boss, concept of snail girl, concept of soft girl plays into any of that? I think it might actually, but I want to hear your opinions first.
Go ahead, Fairy. I was the last one to talk a lot.
Oh, well, I guess what I would say is no, not really. No. So, like, my perspective on, like, I do agree that this is an intragender conversation and this is an intragender conflict. But my contention is that this is an intragender conflict that appears to be between, like, women who are peers in the corporate world. But what this intragender conflict actually is, and this is what I think, I don't think Tuna agrees with me, is what this really is an intragender conflict between younger women from, like, Generation Z and from millennial culture who are criticizing their culture that their mothers grew up in. They are criticizing, this is an intergender conflict primarily between younger women and between older women. And so I don't agree that, like, the friendship thing really necessarily applies here because, we're talking about, like, women who are within their own peer groups. I would agree it's probably true that, like, within peer groups, within, like, female friendships, that some of this discourse might be used to police friendships. But I actually think, like, to Tunachip's point, right, about, like, and this is actually a point in favor, frankly, for women specifically in being a part of, like, democratically controlled, business and corporations, is that I think that is probably more conducive for women. I think that, like, I think it's probably true that, like, more women probably work best together. Like, instead of, like, there's one woman that's bossing everybody else around, it's instead, like, women working together cohesively together as a unit.
Do you have data for that? Because that intuitively, and an experiment, like, in my experience, that doesn't seem to be the case. But I'm just using anecdotes from my end.
In my opinion, okay, like, the only way, the way I think that, like, the most successful female groups that work well together are groups where women are equally able to make decisions and are able to have input together. And I think that, like, this was something that, like, was brought up, like, in the DGG discourse, like, with Kyla and with Destiny, where they mentioned the queening phenomenon. I do think that it can be the case, like, amongst, like, some groups of women where there is one woman who bosses everybody else around. And I do think that there is some resentment that can come from that. The only way that you mitigate that, though, and which is, again, why I'm sort of referencing the mother archetype, even though I really don't want to, because I don't want to say that, like, you have to be, domestic and sweet and humble and all. That's not really what I'm saying here. What I mean by that is, okay, that in order to be successful, like, as a woman in a leadership role, whether it's fair or not, whether it's good or not, it often requires you having to embody qualities that are a little bit different as opposed to, like, a male leader. And that's not all fair. It's not fortunate that it's that way, but it's often the case that you will have to be more diplomatic.
Societal or biological?
I think it's societal. Okay. I think it's like you have to make. Yeah, I don't think like you have to. I don't think it's rooted or, like, it's intrinsically this way. Okay. But I think because of the way our society is, I think that when you are a woman in a position of leadership, you have to, like, it's the scene at the end of Mean Girls. Okay, like, when we all remember the scene where, I don't remember what her name is, Lindsay Lohan's character. She's like, I don't know if she's crowned prom queen or if somebody else is. She takes the crown off her head and she rips it up into pieces, and she scatters the crown amongst all of the women that are down, like, there. And then she comes down and she is, like, one, and she is just the same as everyone else. Okay, that is more of what the dynamic of, like, female leadership, I think, unfortunately, has to often look like. Okay, I think that, like, higher, and I think there has to be more. I think, like, for women that to work well together, there has to be at least, like, there has to be some amount of parity between different women. And I think the only way you get to have this hierarchical relationship between you is if and only if, unfortunately, you're nice enough to everyone else.
So
and if you're not nice to everyone, you get penalized for it.
So because of culture, and this is your assertion here, I'm curious if Tuna agrees. I'm going to toss it to Tuna after this.
I think that the role of women in hierarchy is actually partially biologically produced, but it's not because of a unique instance inside of women. It's a shared thing, which is that women are the first pair bond. So I think that people care a lot more about what women think, and we read their emotions a lot more, and we focus on women's emotions more, and we notice their emotions more than we like blank slate them or like think of them as like text coming out of a robot. So it's just one of these things where like men and women respond to women differently than we respond to men. I do think that there's a biological basis. Whether or not we can overcome it, comes through a sort of like social lens. But it's a small difference. And if anybody doesn't think that it's relevant, I mean, the easiest way to go to it, which is just like when women say that their feelings are hurt, do you think that it's just because we think the man's being a bitch and being a bitch is like being a woman and a man should be better than a woman? Or do you think it's that we care more about women's feelings because women's feelings influence men's behavior? So they are kind of like this central conduit. They ripple out. I think that men's emotions and feelings tend to only influence their own behavior. People really, really are influenced by the desires and the antagonisms inside of women's lives. Happy wife, happy life. No one's saying happy husband, happy life. There's something to the social construct that might also be biological.
Do you agree or disagree, Fairyqueen? This is a bit of a rabbit hole, but
I would agree with you that the happy wife, happy life maxim, I think that definitely exists. I think like it's definitely a part of culture. I don't quite know if I agree with you on the biological. We can hash that out maybe like another time. That would be actually, I think, be really interesting for us to hash out some other time. I don't know. I would say, I'm sorry, I just blanked out for like 30 seconds.
It's okay.
Wow, man's talking, but his words are not important enough for you. You are busy dealing with your woman emotions.
No.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Well, but so I guess what I would say to you is like, and this is something, I think it's often the case. I think it's true that like there's often a lot of pressure from women to men in order to you must make me happy. Okay. Why haven't you done the dishes? Why haven't you picked your underwear off the floor? Are you going to pay for the groceries? Are you going to pay the mortgage? Okay. You want to sit back, you want to chill and just kick back some Bud Lights and watch ESPN at the end of the day. You just want peace. But the wife wants you to get off your ass. Okay. Because she also wants peace, because she's also been working at a receptionist job all day and she wants you to fucking do something around the house for once. Okay. So I don't know. Right. So it's often the case, right, where there can be a man, a husband, right, who is a husband and he benefits, right, from either being deliberately neglectful of household duties or being deliberately neglectful of doing chores, or when he does the chores, he does them deliberately very, very badly so that she winds up doing most of the housework anyway. And so, like, yeah, there is this pressure from women towards men, right, for men to please them and to make them happy, right? But the flip side of this is that it's often the case that men, at least, and we have like lots of data, like seeing like, especially from during COVID, about women's perceptions of like the division of household labor.
Was this in Sopranos as well?
No, this is from the New York Times, like from during COVID-19. No, like it's very clear, regardless of whether we think it's true or not, women have the perception that men do less around the house than they do. They have consistently had that perception for many, many years. And so even if it's the case that we culturally accept the idea of happy wife, happy life, right? That's only because so many wives are not happy, okay? And so many men, frankly, from their perspective, you can argue if it's fair or not, are neglectful and are able to get away with being neglectful. And women wind up having to pick up all of the slack. So the reason why happy wife, happy life, right, is because when men don't do this, right, they get an earful, right? Hence the nag, right? Hence like the idea of having a wife who's constantly nagging you at home over and over and over again.
Okay, I got a lot of thoughts on this, but it might be a little off topic, and I'm going to read the super chat first. $10 from Psychonaut. Thank you for the $10. You've been a good supporter today. Gang, the rest of you, all 100 of you in chat right now across Twitch and YouTube, you need to be more like Psychonaut and give me your money, okay? Well, thank you. Psychonaut says, it's called in-group bias, Tunachip. Women have a large in-group bias that men don't have, and some men tend towards women, causing a massive imbalance in society and situations. I'll let you respond to that, Tuna.
Yeah, I mean, men don't just have an in-group bias. Men used to have an in-group bias, and it's sort of culturally gone out because it's been seen. And I don't think that it's just that. We've watched enough media made by the Jews to convince the matriarchal culture to combust and fall apart so that the Jews can beat us. Because that is the cultural conversation on the right primarily. No, I think it's that inside of the architecture of male culture has always been competition, and with a new domain comes new competitions, and this is the new competition. The new competition is inside of the feminist communities or sort of modern pro-women communities. It's actually beneficial for you to call out men because that's less competition sexually, socially. It's beneficial for you to be the social justice warrior, whereas before it wasn't.
Trust
I don't know
me,
if
ladies,
it's
I'm an ally, so you can let your
I think we
guard
never
down
had
on
the
me.
in-group bias that we thought we had. We had in-group situational solidarity. The situation was better for us, if that makes sense. But anyway,
it does. I'm and I know I got to wrap up soon. I don't want to keep you guys all night, but I just wanted to push back a little bit on what you were saying, Fairyqueen, about the division of labor. I don't think that's necessarily untrue. So first of all, I just want to posit that up front, that I don't have any hard data on this to give you. I can only go by personal experience. I can only go by my own relationships that I've had and relationships of people who I've known personally. There tends to be a dynamic that I've seen where in a situation where one part of the couple is unhappy, they tend to see those things that normally wouldn't be a problem as problems. So while a guy who leaves his underwear on the floor wouldn't be a problem normally, because the woman's unhappy, it becomes a problem. Or the man's unhappy and the woman didn't do the laundry and now he's upset, right? Whereas before, if they were happy, this wouldn't even be a problem. So I wonder how much we're putting the cart before the horse here when it comes to divisions of labor. And $10 from Time Watch to say, good. Thank you for that $10, Time Watch. More people be like Time Watch and Cinco Knot and Admiral Gibbs and all those other people who've given me. Testy Johnson's giving me money, even though he swore he'd never do it again. So yeah, give me more money. But yeah, what were your thoughts?
Testy straight into my pocketbook right now.
So, so here's what I'd say. So like, this is from the New York Times. This was from 2020. So the data is a little bit old, right? But this is like just something I'll just read out. Okay. So this is according to the New York Times, and I'll drop the link here in chat for you both to see. So these attitudes bear it in practice too. Men between ages 18 and 34 in opposite sex relationships are no more likely than older couples to divide household labor equitably. And while it's true that men have picked up the household labor, a significant gap remains. In the United States, women spend about 4 hours a day on unpaid work, compared to about 2.5 hours, according to the data from the Organization for Economic Unpaid work. I don't know. So my assumption of what that means is, and we can like dig into it, and I can go down the rabbit hole here. I just quickly Googled this. My assumption of what that means is, I'm assuming it means things like laundry, cutting the grass, dishes. I'm assuming that that's what it means. I don't know that that's what it means. That's my assumption of what it means. Now what you
sitting pretty.
Yeah. Well, that's the soft girl, soft boy thing, which we should talk about too, because we talked about Snail girls a lot. The soft girl.
We'll talk about that in the post-op. Let's not open
the post-op, and also I want to have you on again, Fairyqueen, specifically to talk about soft girls and how I think that they're destroying America, as well as soft boys. Soft boys are also destroying America, but soft girls is more interesting to say. Snail girls is funny too, but
yeah.
I think. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that it's probably a little bit of both. It's probably both that both men and women probably are somewhat to blame for this, because we do know that like it is simply true that like you can find stats, and there are some studies that do show that women like rank higher in neuroticism and they rank lower in happiness generally across their lifespan. So it is probably true that like women are probably more likely to be picky, right, about things that maybe men don't necessarily care about, or maybe aspects of the household that aren't quite as important, right? You have way more women as opposed to men who want to be the Martha Stewart of the home, right? Who want the garden, who want the bone china, right? Who want who want these aspects of domesticity and seek them for them in their households that men simply do not. And there is a bad side to that, which is that like that means, of course, that like that like it is true that like there are women who spend too much money, on buying things for the house that it doesn't need, right, et cetera, right? So there is a critique to be made there, probably a capitalist critique that you could put towards that. But the flip side of this is, and Tuna and I have like looked at TikTok's videos of this, which is the other end of the extreme. On the one hand, you have a woman who wants to be Martha Stewart, who wants to be Betty White, right? Who wants to be the wife in American Beauty who is too neurotic and too controlling. But the flip side of this is where you have the guy and he has a television, he has a coffee table, he has a mattress on the floor, he has a leather chair, he has like 1 or 2 cups of ramen noodles, he hasn't showered in 6 days, he, has like 1 pair of khaki pants, 1 pair of jeans, 2 pairs of underwear, a couple of, he mostly only has like work shorts or band t-shirts, right? He has like, absurd, he has like all sorts of things like this, right? Where you walk into the household and the fact that it is not at least exactly, Tunachip, right? Exactly that, right? It looks just like that, right? And the thing is, right, sometimes Martha Stewart needs to go into these places, okay? The place that the room that you construct for yourself, the house that you design, it does matter, okay? And on the one hand,
God forbid men have a hobby and want to focus on their hobby, okay?
There has to be a balance, right? There has to be a balance between
why? If the guy's happy, why are we bothering him?
Well, I would say 1, because a lot of those, it'll help you get laid and it will help you stay married, right? Which is one reason why, right? Secondly, right, because of the fact that we have so many women who are going into the workforce, right? Because we are seeing more, it would be beneficial for men and women if women were more likely and more able to accept men to be stay-at-home dads, right? But a lot of women don't want to have men to be stay-at-home dads because they know that if they do that, that room that Tunachip just brought up on the screen is the room that they are going to come home to every single day at 6 o'clock when they get off work. Most women, like many women, have been raised their entire lives to try to aspire to be, well, that's true too, right? Like the filthy like bathroom sink as well, which is another critique maybe you could make, like an inequity of like how this is applied. But the thing is, right, a lot of men simply do not have the social conditioning to care about these things in the same ways as women, which means that a lot of women are afraid, right? If I let you be a stay-at-home dad and stay at home, is the house going to look nice?
I think you need
is lasagna going to be on the table? Is the kid's diaper going to be changed?
Here's my last take, then we're going to get to closing statements because I got some things to do and I don't want to keep you guys all night here. But my last thought on this specifically, and there's so much that we could talk about here today, but I would encourage women out there to get a little Buddhist in their life, to learn some Tao, okay? The art of not giving a fuck, okay? Right? Don't feel like you have to aspire to have 3.5 art deco things in your home to be happy, or it has to look a certain way. You can. If that's what you both want, cool. Find someone who wants the same thing as you, right? If I've known women, they just want to play some video games, hang out with their man. They don't need a lot. Cool. Don't yuck their yum. Let them live their life. I know men who are very fastidious and want everything to be just so, and they want to make sure that all the stuff is around them, and they plaster posters of their bands and stuff all over their walls. Okay, I've seen that. If that's what you want, find someone who also wants that thing and be happy, right? But don't yuck each other's yum. Come on. Let's let men have hobbies, and if they want a man cave, okay? Because again, I've been in relationships where I've cohabitated And I've had a man cave where this my space, sometimes it looks like that. And that's okay because it's my space, not our space, not your space, my space, right? And I think we should stop. I don't go into like their room and mess their shit up. But anyway, what are you? Hey, off the screen. I don't know.
Men deserve a man cave. I don't know
if
agree with you.
We have that on the screen actually, but
is that against?
I don't know actually. But here's what we're gonna do, gang. This has been a great show. I want to give each of these individuals an outro. Tell people where you can find them. I put a link to their YouTubes in my YouTube description, and I encourage you to go give them a sub, give them a follow. Support them. They've taken their time out of their day to come on my channel and talk. And so I would love if you showed them some love. What do we got coming up next week? Monday, I'm going to be talking to Hutch and maybe Josiah about Biden staying in the race, whether he should or not. On Wednesday, I'm going to be hosting a debate on nuclear energy and nuclear power. That should be fun. And then on Friday, we have Girlfriend Guide for Guys coming on to take your calls. So fellas, if you want some girlfriend advice, tune in. But anyway, I'm going to toss it first to Fairy Queen and then let Tuna have last word. Fairy Queen, closing thoughts. Where can people find you?
First of all, you can find me on Twitter. You can find me at It's Me Fairy Queen. So it's all lowercase. You can find me there. You can find me on YouTube on at It's Me Fairy Queen. You can find me there on Twitch, YouTube, and on my Substack. So you can find me in all of those places. So please like and subscribe. Thank you very much for listening to me. I want to close my thoughts with a very simple thing. Me and Tunachip, we will have these back and forths like frequently, I think. Like we plan on like talking and digging really deeply into these topics over and over again. It's a goal of ours. Please come and watch us like when we come to talk. We're really excited. We're really excited to do it. But my last final thought that I want to leave everyone with, Snail Girl, Soft Girl, Girlboss, men of all different archetypes, whatever you choose to aspire to be, right? Nobody is an archetype, okay? Nobody is a thing. Nobody is, as Wick mentioned, nobody is a horoscope. But there is one thing that is not, I think, foolish to care about. And that's that your life is built off of dreams, okay? Pursuing your dreams, creating your dreams, and constructing the life that you want. And I think that emphasizing the idea of working hard and trying to achieve your dreams to try to create the best life you can for yourself and for your family is a goal that is worthy to pursue. Now, that doesn't mean that everyone has to be a VP of corporate, and it doesn't mean that everyone has to do these things. But I do think that if you do choose to do these things, or if you know someone who does these things, if you know somebody who works really hard to have financial gain and success, that is something that should be celebrated. We need to support, like, the answer to women failing, like when they try to start businesses or when they try to succeed, is not to say that it was foolish to start that business in the first place. It's to say we need to have more supports and education. We need to figure out what went wrong and to fix it so that these women can have the dream that they have always wanted to have. So,
okay, gang, Tunachip, what do you got?
Yeah, I'm gonna be go live right after this. So if you guys
go live
want
now, and I'll just right into you.
Okay, yeah, I'll go. I'm gonna make my final statement, and then I'll hit the live button just so that the video looks a little bit more normal. But yeah, basically, my take on this is that women are going through what men have already gone through, and I think men have ended up in a place that women should avoid ending up in, because we're dealing with new problems, which is that when you're asking in the same way that men have, am I going to become a podcaster or am I going to become an accountant? Am I going to follow my father's footsteps in the family business, or am I going to try and tread my own path and go for a more difficult, ambitious role? Instead of absolutism, instead of this teleological approach, this end-oriented, like I pick only end. So I actually kind of disagree with Fairy partially. I agree dreams are what they're constructed of, but instead, what women need to be able to do is get rid of the contradiction between the snail girl and the girl boss, and instead have a goal, constantly be asking yourself and checking with yourself whether or not that goal is realistic, and whether or not you were burning yourself out, and then you'll be fine. Instead of making trendy, and instead of making and watching a million TikToks about how you need to change your thought about how you approach the world constantly, just like spend less time watching media and more time in a silent room thinking and feeling your feelings, and you will like learn way more about what you're supposed to do in your career than you will ever from watching hashtag Snail Girl, hashtag boss bitch, hashtag girl boss content. These identities, they're not for you. They're not for you as an individual. They are trends inside of this long, enduring discourse that doesn't want to end and doesn't actually care about how you end up as a person. So, like in the same way that men have Andrew Tates and we have destinies that we have to ignore both polar ends and just tread our own path, so too do women.
So
you know what I mean? Basically,
women. Gang.
Which, not to shit on, and I'm excited to see what multiple people will say about what guys need to do about the girlfriend question. So it's nice to have those conversations, but do spend some time asking yourself those questions as well.
Okay, the GQ, what should be done
the GQ,
about women?
yes, exactly.
Okay,
PFQ.
I'll rate out. So on YouTube, we're gonna rate out into Stardust. She has an upcoming stream coming up. We're gonna rate out into her, and on Twitch, we're going to, as soon as he goes live, we're gonna.
I'm live officially now.
Now. Okay, Tunachip TV, or is it just Tunachip? I forget.
It's just Tunachip. Tunachip TV is just the Twitter. So
Gotcha. Okay, gang. Remember, Monday, 6 p.m. Eastern. I'll see you then. I love you all, romantically and sexually. Bye.
See you later, Wick.
Bye.
Bye, Wick.
Keep waving. You got like 7 seconds.
Okay. Fairy, if you just want to go ahead and do a private call between the two of us, I'll hang up this and then we can do that.
Okay, we'll do.
Snail Boss Rising. Bye.
Bye.